Mama said don't talk to strangers. That's okay. We'll do it for you. Welcome to the Bar Talk Podcast, where we talk to interesting people doing interesting shit. That's it. Right on. Well, welcome, Ken.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great.
Fabulous.
Yeah, you want to introduce yourself to the folks at home?
Yeah, Ken Byrka from Revival Seeds, enjoying some great vibes here. Wow, this is nice.
Thank you. You know, we enjoy it. It's been this is something I've wanted to do for, I was saying 2 years for a while, but it's closer to 4 years actually. But the last 4 years have been kind of crazy, so sometimes those dreams had to be delayed a little bit.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah, but I think the real key is just not giving up.
You can't, never give
Can't
up.
give up. Yeah,
Never
something
give up.
long-term goals.
I've got a shirt like that for farming. It says never give up.
Never give up.
I had it on all of last year, just to remind myself.
Farmers are a different type of person, aren't they?
Well, you naturally have to have extreme patience and a love for what you do, of course.
And the physical and mental grit.
Yes,
to hang in there,
and the right kind of knowledge too. There's a big piece of that that's important.
For sure. I was a fifth generation farmer.
Oh, what's that?
Yeah, left.
know that.
Farming went under and about 8 years ago, and I got on MasterChef Canada and started in this whole world.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's where that comes from.
Yeah. So I know all too well that whole struggle. Yeah.
But it's important, food
It is.
production is so important.
And there's something to do with like in one person's lifetime, you can learn a lot, but there's that compounding interest of generational knowledge.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like sometimes there was things that we would run into on the farm that we hadn't seen in our time, but like my grandfather had.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
A learning curve and what's taught and carried on.
Yeah. So your family's been in it forever, right?
Oh gosh, since since they immigrated in the turn of the century.
Yeah. And when they're probably doing it in Europe as well, correct?
They still are.
Yeah.
In fact, a funny story, an uncle of mine went to visit Lviv, Western Ukraine, and they basically thought they were coming back to take the farm after 120 years.
Really?
Because it's still, the title is partially still owned in the family.
Wow.
Who would have known, right?
Yeah.
And no, it's all good,
Yeah, I don't recommend invading Ukraine right now.
no kidding, yeah.
They have enough problems.
This was about 20 years ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it's the western part of the Ukraine where most of my family came from, and even into Poland to some degree, and I guess Romania, Carpathian Mountains.
Wow. And so you've been there.
I have not, but
You have not,
many
yeah.
family members
Wow.
have. It's definitely on the bucket list.
Yeah.
To take a look at those farmlands.
I bet.
Apparently, quite analogous to parts of the Annapolis Valley. I would have not known that. But,
Yeah, you wouldn't expect. I didn't realize that Ukraine was such a food producer.
Yes.
Because when we go about our lives, we don't really understand where all the food comes from. But I remember when this war started, I remember hearing it was something like 15 to 20% of the world's calories comes from Ukraine.
Absolutely, breadbasket, right?
Unreal.
And so the battles have continued, right, over that prime land.
Mm-hmm. Food security is something we've been talking a lot about. We've had some different farmers and stuff on here. But like as the population's growing and climate change is happening, the world is shifting and changing, and food security is going to be a huge thing.
Food
I think
security.
there's something like 500 million people that are considered food insecure in the world now, like don't know where their food's going to come from.
Right, and you have to consider seed security if you're talking about food security.
Exactly.
So, from our perspective, it's a reality.
Yeah.
And it concerns me every day, and I think that's part of what drives me to do, and the family to do what we do and continue doing this.
Cool. So this is something your family's been doing for a long, long time.
Yeah, the trunk of seeds. I'd like
The trunk of seeds. Yeah,
trunk
tell
of
that
seeds.
story.
My great grandfather Wazil, I believe it was Wazil or Aiko. I can't remember the names specifically, but the trunk came over. It crossed the port of Hamburg, I believe, and the German guards were about to open it, and there were locks on it and pulleys and things. And I believe my grandfather said it's all babies. They had infants with them, diapers and things like clothing, so they didn't bother opening and shoved it through. But there were several jars and crockery containers full of seeds. There were even garlic seed bulbs in there as well, apparently.
And what would have happened if the Germans had
Well, this is
seen it?
just it. I guess they would have just confiscated it at that point, and they would have been on that boat for I don't know how many weeks with nothing.
Yeah.
And that's in the sense that a lot of people perished for that and became diseased and so forth on those journeys. So you think back and think how difficult it would have been to survive that journey to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
Thousands of immigrants coming on these steamships, right?
I flew over the ocean once a few years ago to go to Amsterdam, and it was 7 hours in the air, and I thought it was terribly uncomfortable because I'm quite tall.
Yeah, flying is
But that's
uncomfortable
nothing.
generally.
That's nothing compared to what these folks did
I know.
100 years ago
And most
or
of them
longer.
shoved into steerage,
Yeah.
as well. So you're in darkness for a large part of that trip. And what a journey! And here we are with 6 generations later, and we're still carrying on that legacy.
It's amazing
to grow and produce heirloom seeds.
So now, some of those seeds that came over on the trunk, are some of the descendants of some of those seeds still active?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I was hoping you'd say that.
And they've evolved over open pollinated.
I bet.
Growing conditions, of course, over hundreds of years, over 110, 20 years now.
They would adapt to this climate.
Exactly.
It's
They
amazing.
first would have adapted to the prairies because that's where the farm.
Right.
When they first came over, they stayed in the Halifax area. I guess my great grandfather was a carpenter, and he made some money in shipbuilding somewhere.
Okay.
We don't know
Yeah.
where.
Yeah.
It wasn't Halifax. I believe it might have been Mahone Bay, Chester, somewhere on that south shore.
Oh, there was shipbuilding all around.
Certainly. So it took them a year to save up enough to get the land grant, where they did get it. It was free land, but they couldn't get there. They had $5 Canadian between 8 of them or something like that. And when they finally got there, and many of those seeds made it, we still have some of the old flowers, the Sweet William that came from there. We know. I think there are about 33 different species now, not only from my father's side, but my mother's as well, who they came from the Kiev area, or northwestern Ukraine. So, and we have those as well that came in 1908, 1909.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's incredible to think that we've been able to continually grow that lineage. And there have been some changes. One of my uncles grew sweet peas. He was breeding them. He was doing all kinds of things in the 40s and 50s with sweet peas. And we have a couple of very unique sweet peas, but we can't identify.
Yeah.
We just can't find out where. They're probably Italian, we think. But they would have come from that part of Western or Eastern Europe and hybridized over those years.
That's so cool.
It's just an interesting thing.
Nature does its own thing once in a while too, right? Like
It sure does.
You get like genetic mutations and these weird things and adaptations, and sometimes you get like a family could get a strain of something that no one else has. Right?
That's right. You've got to be on it to select.
Right, and then to keep it, because you can get it, but then you can lose it.
And it takes time.
Right.
That might be a recessive trait, and it might not be very strong, so you have to continually grow it out and find out what it's going to do. We've been doing that with certain varieties for years now, and still not quite ready to sell them and market them because we're not confident that they're true to type, or that the variety hasn't stabilized. But a lot of companies will still sell those and you grow them and you realize they're not stabilized yet. We're very, very cognizant of that fact. So
cool. So what is like your main business model? Like what is your biggest stream of income? How does it work? Who are your customers? Give me the bird's eye view of how this happens.
Well, it's evolving every day.
I bet.
The U.S. market has become something that's taking off. We didn't push it, but it just inadvertently became a rollover, right?
Yeah.
Started in the New England states, and then it's become...
like how long ago?
I would say 2 years ago, and now we're finding that's becoming so prevalent for us that we can... And there are some things that are involved with the border, being a seed supplier that we're going through right now, documentation-wise. But the biggest part of the business was to produce heirloom seed and revive varieties and save varieties for the diversity of the seed itself. And so we've done that the best we can, but we're continually trying to find those varieties. And I'll give you an example. There's a broccoli called Dandy Broccoli. It almost went out of circulation in 1970. It was in catalogs everywhere. Beautiful, beautiful species, but it happens fast. You can lose a variety.
Oh, okay.
In 1909, I think there were 39 or 40 different varieties of one pickling cucumbers, right? I mean, now
they took their pickles seriously.
They did.
Yeah.
We're down really to about 7 or 8.
Wow.
When you think about it.
Yeah.
There's many hybrids, but we've lost corn. I think there were 300 or 400 varieties of sweet corn at that time, and we're really down to about a dozen.
Because like the big mass farming doesn't really concern itself with these things, right? So
it's not necessary for monoculture to you improve. There is some value and validity to breeding, to plant breeding. It's important on a large scale.
Yeah.
But in the end, large scale you become dependent on all the other capital inputs, right? On a sustainable level, you can manage that and you can adapt and change much faster.
Right.
So to stay at a sustainable level is the key for our business.
Yeah.
So that every seed that comes in, there's a set of hands and a set of eyes on that. And we want to continue and maintain that. It's amazing what you'll miss if you become commercialized at any, and it goes through machines and sorters.
I bet.
It just doesn't.
So help me if I'm going to try and get my mind wrapped around this. So like in nature, there'd be many, many varieties of potatoes, corn, right? Like, is that safe to assume? Like back when all these things were kind of wild?
Yeah, well, certain species would naturalize.
Yeah.
And they'd be selected because of that, potentially, if they would be more visual to growers and botanists, for example. Or they would hybridize them and come up with a variety. Let's say in Glenayas, for example, 1600, the monks, they did all kinds of
right.
breeding,
They were
right?
very good with breeding.
Absolutely.
Things,
And so you've got all these, these flower varieties, sweet peas, whatever. It's endless. And so what happens is as the variety is stabilized, it becomes open pollinated, it adapts, and it changes, as you alluded to earlier. And so over time, you have something called seed provenance. Seed provenance means that seed has developed and adapted in the area it's been growing.
Okay.
And so if I'm growing seeds here and you're buying seeds from southern Texas, the same species, I'm going to tell you that you're probably going to have issues with the southern Texas seed.
Right.
Oh, maybe not this year with the humidity, but anyway,
Right.
it's the way it works. So
And you may get lucky a year or two, but over the time.
that's right, because that seed is, and we've even found that in the short period of time that our seeds sometimes are slower to germinate on the North Mountain of Nova Scotia.
Okay.
It's just because they're not ready for that. They know seeds are opportunists, right? They're like teenagers. You say they find a way to do it, but they're only at their speed and at their time. And so we find that people say, "Well, your seeds were slow to germinate, but they were 100% when they did. I'm wondering why they were slower." And we'll explain. Well, hey, they've been growing here for now 15 years. This is why, or 10, 12 years, whatever it's been on that mountain. That's why.
Okay.
They're not going to wake up because they're used to not having to wake up because there isn't enough heat up there yet.
Okay.
Right? It's a slow roll.
Yeah.
And so these are the things that happen quite quickly. You start to realize how important provenance is on seed and adaptation. And that's open pollinated. So there's all kinds of other things that happen when a seed is open pollinated. It basically adapts.
Open pollinated?
Open pollinated meaning the insects can go from another to another plant.
Right.
So you're not dealing with a vegetative strain. So the sexual reproduction, right? So it's crossing with other plants in
What would be
its
the
species.
opposite of open pollination? Like
Well,
artificial?
Yes, vegetative selection, so tissue culture, those kinds of things where you're trying to propagate a seed. Grafting, for example, right?
Because a couple of years ago, I planted my pumpkins and my zucchinis too close.
And you saved the seed?
No, I got
Good thing you didn't.
a zumpkin or something like that they call it.
Well, you would if you'd saved the seed, but
Okay.
But the seed you planted might have already had that problem.
Oh, okay.
So if you got a pump of zucchini, a zucca pumpkin or whatever, right? Because it's the same.
Zumpkin?
It's Cucubertaceae people, right? Which is the same species, and they would need. We don't grow them any closer than about 1,700 feet.
Yeah, my garden's only
Right.
16 feet.
And I had a friend who did that, and they said, "Well, yeah, but we have them spaced 200 feet apart." I said, "That's not enough for a big yellow flower, right?" The bees go in there, and we've seen all kinds of anomalies. Like there's self-fertile species like tomatoes, beans. Most legumes are self-fertile. Not so much runner beans, but let's just take a common bean, a green snap bean, right? That bean, for example, what happens is it flowers. It's self-fertile, so the corolla, the pollen tube, very difficult for an insect to get in there.
Okay.
Now, having said that, a bumblebee, if there's a lot of bumblebees out, and they're mechanically strong enough to rip open that, and there's still maybe 25% pollen in that part,
determined.
they can get in there and they can crush your beans, especially older heirloom varieties.
So then normally it would just
Well, it's
fertilize itself from
exactly,
inside.
exactly what happens. And so you could
just
plant,
like the wind and motion. And
That's right. So there's distances like isolation distances, that they recommend for self-pollinating species, 50, 60 feet between bean species, so you don't get across. Well, that doesn't work on our organic environment where we are. We have to go 150 feet to ensure that we don't get outcrossing.
amazing.
So but that was a learning curve. we started at 80 feet, realized we still had a 1%, maybe 2% cross on some species. You could actually trace it, which bean the bumblebees would have gone to.
Bean tracing.
When you go back, because you have to have incredible
Trackers
records.
on those
Yeah, no
bees.
kidding, eh? Yeah, they're kind of strange bumblebees. When you think of honeybees, they're very much more aligned and organized, and then you got the ADHD bumblebee, going over here. Oh, what's going on here? They're kind of like the potheads. Yeah, it's like, hey, look at that one. Let's go over there. Yeah, why not? And it's what happens. And so you've got to watch. Bumblebees can really wreak havoc with. They're strong, very mechanically. They can push those sepals open, and they can get into that corolla.
Cool.
So you learn these things, and it's different every year. This year we didn't have as many of pollinators early on when the bees were flowering, but we had 8 inches of rain. So I mean, what next, right?
So what's striking me as we're talking here is that we all people eat. We eat, right? We eat 3 or 4 times a day. We don't think about this stuff. We go to the grocery store, we get our stuff. Most of it comes from a big monoculture farm somewhere. But that's the way we live now. But like 100 years ago, this is the kind of stuff that pretty much everybody would know.
Right.
You'd had to know. Like your survival is dependent on it.
And that knowledge is not easy to find.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So like most folks would grow their own gardens. They would have to have a general knowledge of this stuff. Moon cycles and bumblebees and soil
big time.
and
Lunar,
keeping seeds and all this stuff would be so important. But we don't know any of that stuff anymore.
It got passed on from generations, and as we successively seem to lose a little bit more every day, right? But there is a resurgence, I would say.
There seems to be.
In generational resurgence, particularly I think of my kids who are all in their 20s, and they're very interested in what grandma and grandpa did. Not us, they don't care about us, but they want to know about that generation and what flowers they grew. When did they plant their tomatoes? Did they put them out on the moon? Did they actually use that full moon in June? They did.
Didn't it? Yeah.
We have records of that, actually.
Cool.
And we've
Old
tried
journals?
Yeah. They're handwritten.
Cool.
And we get an idea of what was going on in my grandfather's planting. It's very hard to read because it's part Ukrainian. So the alphabet isn't, and then it's part Polish and it's part English and it's what is this?
Wow.
But they're very limited, the amount of journals we have. But it's also referenced with the Farmer's Almanac at times.
Yeah.
So he would have used that.
That's cool.
There are many actual, if you think of the old timers, as we call them, they had a lot of other methods of planting and dealing with land production that we don't use anymore. And that would be using rain cycles. When there was a wet period, and how to control weeds, cutting before rains, certain weeds with sickle bars, and it would kill the roots, thistles, that kind of knowledge. It's very difficult.
And they're very scientific about it. Just
it was passed on.
Experience.
It was passed on from, you think about the 1600s in European culture. All of that knowledge was there. We learn something every day about our past, and we go, how did we do that? How did we know that? Because we seem to have forgotten it now.
Yeah. Because the human story, we started as hunter-gatherers, right? We're just picking berries or wild vegetables where we can, hunting animals. Or
did we? Maybe we were much more civilized.
I do think we probably were very civilized in the past. I'm open to that idea. But then at some point we became farmers, settled down, became farmers, and we learned these kinds of things, and people did that for themselves for a long, long time until just here in our, probably what would be post-World War is when we got more industrialized with the food, right? I believe that's what I've heard, how the story goes. We had to supply so much food for the soldiers and everything, and a lot of the farmers were gone, so they got much more industrialized with the food.
I believe so.
Yeah.
There's definitely a trend, even in the, I think at the turn of the century, we start seeing that with mass production of anything, right?
Right.
The Henry Ford lines, the assembly lines, there starts to be a way to do one thing very well, as opposed to doing multiple things. The diversification starts to become watered down, right?
Right.
Let's do one thing and do it very well. Piecework, the whole idea of growing multiple varieties and diversifying what you do in farming and agriculture as we know it becomes less and less of a reality by the time we hit that period in the mid-century.
Right.
Monoculture becomes the norm, right?
I remember when I was a kid in like the 80s, everybody had a garden, and it was still kind of financially feasible to do that for yourself for a while. Like my grandfather had a fruit cellar and he'd stock it all up. But then it becomes a time when everyone's like, it's just cheaper to buy potatoes. It's just easier to buy these things. And a lot of people just kind of forgot to do that. And then you see COVID in the last few years, and you see supply chains break down. And you see, things just not available, or the price is going up because of inflation. And you see a lot of folks. What I see, a lot of my friends, it's almost like these little warning bells in the back of their brain. When they went to the grocery store and the meat department was gone, and the produce was gone, and the toilet paper is gone, they start saying, "I need to make sourdough. I need to get a garden. I need to get a gun. I need to hunt. I need to do these things." And that's probably why you've seen such a
I agree,
demand.
100%. Economics ultimately.
But also I think there's a little something instinctual in this that knows that maybe we can't depend on strangers to provide these things for us.
Right, and there are questions arising amongst many people about the nutritional quality of what's coming in a box, right?
Oh yeah, because they're not really concerned about if that tomato nourishes your body. They just want to make it shelf stable and lots of them, shaped the same, put it on a truck from California. As long as it looks pretty, it doesn't really need to. They don't care what it does for your body.
And this whole thing gets tied into the soil fertility and the value of the soil, and understanding that if the soils are exhausted and you grow an organic tomato in that soil, it may not taste as good because, again, those nutrients and minerals are tied up for years. It's a cycle that has to be continuum and it has to be sustainable.
So I've heard something like a tomato now you have to eat like 8 of them or something like that to give you the same nutrition of one like 50 years ago.
It might even be higher than that.
Might even be more than that, yeah.
You can notice the difference.
Because they'll give it what it needs to grow, but it not necessarily has like the magnesium and all the minerals and vitamins and stuff that it used to have.
Well, you can, and certainly analogous would be strawberries. Is it really, have you ever those bitter, pale tasting, gross strawberries you get? Well, part of it is because you can probably taste the malathion or the pesticide that's still on it on the last spray just before they harvested, which is supposed to be, 12 days? That doesn't sit very comfortable with me, thinking that kelthane was sprayed 12 days before you harvested a crop of strawberries. But that's what happens, right? We get used to it and we assume and we trust that labeling, the FDA, all those things, the regulations are in place to protect us.
Because big businesses never done anything shady.
And that's where people, consumers, have to have a voice.
I think they're waking up.
I think so too.
I think
we see it, and I would say 80% of our customers that buy seeds are aware. Yeah, they're very knowledgeable, and even the new gardeners, many of which, by the way, are people that have retired and haven't had a garden for 25 years. They're saying, we used to do this all the time, and we're tired of not having nutrition in what we buy, and it's costing us way too much.
Right, like financially, it may be cheaper to get the groceries at the grocery store. It might be more efficient for your time and all those things, but
8 tomatoes versus 1?
Is that really nourishing your body? And what's more important than our health? Right?
That's true.
And we see our physical, mental health is worse than it's ever been. Cancer rates are higher.
Exactly.
People's mental anxiety is higher. I've heard that some of the happiest people are farmers. Does that sound true?
I would think there's something to that because I would say a lot of that has to do with vitamin D synthesis. I think everybody that's outside, even in Nova Scotia, what did Carly Simon say? Total eclipse of the sun. Anyway, sorry, I'm referencing that. But even in Nova Scotia, there are enough diffused sunlight rays, even where we are in the North Mountain, that you can synthesize that vitamin D. It's important because vitamin D shuffles around all those other important magnesium, right?
And it's not just a vitamin, it's a hormone.
Most people are probably deficient in magnesium.
I think most people are.
Which is very much correlated. Studies are showing to high anxiety, ADHD, and various other ailments. So disease and inflammation.
But I think there's something natural about being, like you say, in the sunshine, outdoors, having a connection with the earth, having a real purpose.
It's incredible.
And I think purpose, we had a dog trainer in not long ago, Lindsay Tupper, a dog trainer.
She's up in Margarettsville.
Yeah, it's great. And she was talking about how the dogs are full of anxiety now because most dogs were working dogs and they don't have a purpose now. A lot of humans are struggling with the same thing. What do we do? Some people's jobs, it's, I don't know, maybe advertising or something. You're just trying to sales. You're just trying to convince someone to buy something that they don't really want, you know, and you question your purpose sometimes. But with a farmer, you're like, I'm making food to sustain life.
Well, what
And
are
you can
we?
never question that.
Maybe we're 150 years removed from actually just doing nothing but producing food
Right.
for our families.
This is very new. Our lifestyle now is very new and very different. There's been such an abrupt change. I think
of it on
too
the
quick.
schematic of human civilization.
Yeah.
150 years. We've gone from that
Yeah.
necessity, producing food to feed our families, to where we are now, where
Sitting
we need
in
3
an
jobs.
office with fluorescent lights, crunching
right.
numbers for an insurance company, like that's got to be hard on the soul sometimes.
There are so many examples and stories you read about people that leave it behind, right? There are a couple of customers of ours, I'm going to say who they are, that have moved from the GTA, so they're Mississauga area, and they've left $250,000 income professions at 55 years old, and they've sold it all, moved here, and they're living on their retirement of their sale of their property, and they essentially live healthy, and they've never been happier in their lives.
And they're pretty driven, successful people. Like they were successful in this rat race world we had, and, and there's something in them that says, "No, I want to."
And why did you pick
live
Nova?
different.
And I said, why Nova Scotia? I was curious. Well, we think it's a little bit more backward than some of the other provinces, and it'll take us back to a time that we're. I said, you got it. I said, it is kind of horse and buggy at times, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's good.
Well, that's what people
We're a little
want.
bit behind the curve. Like this guy here immigrated from London.
Oh wow!
How long ago? 8, 10 years? No,
2016.
2016.
Yeah, so whatever that is, like 8 years something.
And that's kind of what brought you here, is a little bit of an old-fashioned kind of life.
Interesting. Or was it the
simpler.
rain?
Yeah, it reminded me of England, yeah.
You got a mock with you, mate?
Yeah, but I really think a lot of people are yearning for that even here. A lot of people are there's something in them that wants a little more simple life.
Well, you can do it. You can achieve
inundated
it,
with so much stuff.
You
Like
can have land, though.
So-
That's the other thing. Actually being able to have, and I don't have a lot of land, but like you can do it here.
You don't need a lot, though, right?
No.
But I mean, if you can't get your lawnmower or between your building because it's too narrow, at least here you can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you've got flattened leads and you're trying to get in there and you can't walk between the building, you have to go all the way around and take the autobahn and get to your backyard. That's a problem, right?
Yeah, been there.
Well, in parts of Europe, they buy property not by the acre, but by the square meter, right? Like they'll advertise a home with like so many square meters. Like that's pretty sad.
Yeah, it looks like more though when you do it that way. It's great.
I suppose it does.
But so you get a half acre or an acre here, and you can sustain your family of 4.
Yeah.
It's easy to do. Yeah. So this is the thing, and one of the things we try to do too is reverting back to what we're doing with Revival Seeds, which was your original question. We try to educate people on how to grow successfully. It's important for us, not just because we're selling a product that we want them to be successful with, but we want to know that they actually can achieve success on a sustainable level in there, and we want to know how they're doing with it.
So now you will sell seeds to folks. They will grow things. Do they like save their own seeds and reuse
Yeah, we
those
encourage
seeds?
that as
You
well.
encourage that? Good.
We can't possibly provide enough.
Well, that's great that you're not just trying to sustain your own business.
In fact, we just posted a video. It was mouse melon, cucumber melon, how to save those seeds properly.
Okay.
People don't realize you can actually save the little gherkins, right?
Yeah, I saw the video.
Yeah, so I mean, we're constantly trying to help people to save their own seeds. We can't possibly produce enough for the demand of heirloom seed.
That's great.
Right, but there's it's not that easy to do. You have to help people out with it. They have to understand, first of all, that they could have crossed if they had something, not those, but in cucumbers, for example, you need distance isolation. There's ways to do it, offset timing. You can still do it in your garden. Save 2 different kind of cucumbers if you're growing a 50-day pickler and an 80-day, longer variety, a Longfellow or whatever it might be, right? So there's ways to do it, and timing and hand pollinating is another thing we try to help people with.
Wow.
So
It's got to be so satisfying though for someone to jump in and learn. There's something. I mean, we're curious creatures, right? Humans like to learn. It's got to be a cool thing for someone to take on a project, plant their garden, learn to harvest their own seeds, replant those, and see that growing and see that.
It is satisfying to watch something like that grow. It's really satisfying.
Yeah.
and it's short term, so you don't have to wait 4 years, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's medium term.
That's
Well,
pretty
some
cool.
people get impatient too, especially some of the new growers. I've checked my seeds; they're not up yet. I said, "Well, when did you plant them?" This morning. Well, okay. Well, it's let's wait another 5 days. And see
Yeah,
what
that was
happens."
me.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It's okay though, we try to help people out with that and put the times, and people really do need the specifics. There's so many new
Yeah.
gardeners.
Oh, yeah.
It's incredible. And some of them are doing really well. We encourage people to send us photos and posts with good things and bad things. If they're having trouble with some of our seeds, we want to know.
Right.
We can't improve if we don't know.
Right.
We had an onion variety that wasn't doing well last year. And we said, well, what is it about that strain? Because it's fresh seed, it's a year, and we line them out, we do our germ tests, and it's germinating at 89, 90%. So we're trying to figure it out, and we look. And as we put it in a little bit more moist conditions, we find it was more subjective to damping off. And that's what was happening with some people. They were overwatering a little bit, but that's still not necessarily their problem. That seed shouldn't do that. So we went to the other strain, and we had no issues. So it's one of those things you have to be so aware and so detailed about record keeping in this business to help and mitigate against those problems, right?
But it's so good to have like a community of people that are sharing information and helping each other out.
Well, it helps us
Yeah.
immensely, right? Otherwise, we have no feedback.
And that's the way it used to be in communities, right?
Right,
Like
yeah.
people would, share information and help each other out and compare notes. And that's why you get
yeah.
things like exhibitions, right?
Seed
People would
swapping,
bring
yeah,
their
it's-
animals
sure.
and their vegetables and things like that and trade
Barter.
information. Barter,
It's
yeah.
a barter system.
Yeah, yeah.
You see some of that in Nova Scotia still.
Yeah.
And Bob up the mountain says, "Yeah, I can do that electrical job for you. Just give me some of that firewood, And it's like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
let's do it.
But that sharing of information as well. is
Yes,
so,
of course.
so important.
I'd say
Because there's
yeah.
some gaps in the generation. Maybe
Yeah.
our great-great-grandparents knew how to do this, but then someone stopped.
Well,
and there's a
yeah.
gap there now. So it's so important to
Sure,
to share
yeah.
that. and
Like
help
even
each other out.
pickling, And my
Yeah.
daughter says, "Well, how do I do this?" Well, and I think my wife looked at my grandmother's recipe just to ensure, is there anything
Mm-hmm.
different that she does, that, the dill that's incorporated or whatever it might be. The wonderful thing about the internet is you can source just about any recipe variety, but it's not always something that was done on a heritage side, right? There are changes that occur in the kitchen, so to speak, on the culinary side of it. So what was happening 200 years ago? Maybe it was something that's too archaic now because we didn't have the resources. I don't
Right.
know. But it's nice to try to find some of those old recipes. We've got some for citron melon that a lady sent us from North Bay, Ontario. Never seen that recipe before. And citron melon is one that you would use in preserves.
Okay.
It's just used strictly for preserving other foods.
That's
It tastes bitter. You can't eat citron. It's a
Okay.
watermelon in the
Okay.
watermelon family, Linnaeus, but it doesn't eat. It's not palatable that way.
Oh, yeah.
Some
So
people do eat it, but
It's only used for that then.
only use for that. It's as hard as a rock inside. Like to get the seeds out, it takes us literally. You need a jackhammer. That's how hard the rind is,
Wow.
and the flesh itself too. So these are old, and they're almost. It was very difficult to find a seed source of citron melon. I had to find them in northern Manitoba,
Wow.
in an area called Flin Flon. That's where I got them from. An old grower that the family knew.
cool.
Still had them.
It's like, you think of the folks that landed here in Canada 100 years ago, 200 years ago, whatever. And they're trying to, the growing season is so short.
Right.
And you got to grow all this stuff and you hope it takes. And then winter's coming and you got to get in your firewood, you got to get your vegetables in, you got to get all this stuff in to survive the winter because there's no Costco, there's no superstore, there's none of that stuff. And growing the food is really only half the battle, right? Now you've got to preserve that
labor
food
it,
to
yeah.
last you until you get food
That's
again
why we
the
had
next
eight.
year.
They had 8 kids.
Yeah, yeah.
I think my dad comes from a family of 9 or 10, and
Yeah, and I'm very fascinated with like some of the techniques that people had back then
Yeah,
to preserve
absolutely.
the food.
incredible.
Yeah, like the Acadians here have this rapier or rappy pie, or people say it different
Yeah.
ways. But you've got these old
Rapier,
potatoes that
yeah.
you squeeze the juice out of, get the starch. You've got some kind of salted meat probably, and salted green onions,
Right.
and these things that you could preserve and sustain your family all winter. And then the pickling and all that kind of stuff, canning, like it's not something people have done very much of.
Well, and just underground storage,
Yeah,
those kinds
root
of
cellars,
right.
stuff like that.
That's been a big. There's been a lot of information shared in the last since COVID about how to store food properly, right?
Yeah.
Food storage without off-grid storage,
Right.
permaculture, how you want to link it together. But very interesting. We're looking at doing something very primitive on that site to see if we can recreate
Cool.
the 1850, 1860s 60s model, pre-Confederate model.
Cool.
So, we're-
Because like if the supply chain ever went down, there's so many points of failure that could happen if you had to sustain yourself for your family. I mean, first you got to find the seeds, and like you said, you can't keep up with the demand now, and the grocery stores are open.
yes.
Right. And then people have to learn to farm, and then someone has to learn how to preserve that food to get you back to the next year. Like,
And how to get the seeds out of things again as well. That's
Yeah,
not
there's
trivial, right?
no.
Just
See,
we are
it's- yeah.
so inadequate to
Well,
look after ourselves.
We grow. Basically, we do the same thing a grower does, a market grower, but we like things to die. We're in the business of watching things die properly. And then we wait for them to dehiss the seeds at the point where they're ready, and we have to, it's timing, right? And making sure they're not, because if you take seed too early, what happens often too is it's juvenile. It's not mature enough, and it won't do well the next year. So these are things you have to be so cognizant of. We were just looking at a basket flower today. Last year it didn't do well in the wet. This year's hasn't been as wet. It's been foggy and moist and humid, but it's done well. And the seed looks like a different color. And I said, oh, okay, it's the second year growing it. That's what it's supposed to look like, because you're not gonna find anything on the internet that shows you what
Right.
mature seeds should look like, because it's hard to know, right? Unless you see a botanist post it, because
Right.
the average homeowner might just think that's right. So I couldn't find anything to show that they were jet dark black, these seeds, because every time that we had grown them in trials over the couple of years there before this year, they were multicolored and they weren't doing well. So it's one of those things that you just have to constantly be aware of what mature seed looks like,
So your
viable
family's
seed.
been doing this over 100 years, and you're still learning.
So, my dad is 84, and the other day he says, I've got something that's really weird happening with these. It was a climber. I can't remember which one he's talking about. Oh, cardinal climber, which he thinks is something else. But anyway, that's his theory. A wild vine. He thinks it was crossed,
Okay.
and it's reverting back over years. I said, I don't think so. But anyway, he says there's something really strange with it, because the flower color that you see in the Maritimes that you guys grow, the dark scarlet red, he says, I get these sort of streaks of almost like a purpley pink in it. And that's totally a soil specific thing, apparently. I've done some research on it. So alkalinity changes. He's got 7.3 pH. We have maybe 6.2 here if we're lucky, right? So there's so many things that change flower color, for example. And people say, well, it doesn't look exactly like the one you sold me. I said, well, here's the one we're growing right now. Here's the one you're growing. Yours looks nicer.
Yeah.
And that's probably because of you've got sun, we don't. It's just so many things that change. But that's important to save seeds across the world. We're one grower here. We need more seed savings people, growers in other parts, other regions. Can you imagine if the seeds wouldn't grow in another part of the world, and we only had seed savers in one part? I mean, it's that seed security thing, right?
Yeah.
That you alluded to again earlier. And it's so important to have a diversity.
I don't know, maybe it's just when I'm high. Sometimes I'll smoke a little weed at night, very rarely, but once in a while. And then if something happens when I do that, I think, where are apples from? Like, I'd never wondered that before, but then I'll Google, where are apples from? And they're Asian, right? I think they started in Asia. Like, where did this come from? Where did that come from? Like, I don't know why. It's only when I smoke a little weed that I wonder these things, but it's so
rootstocks,
amazing.
yeah, exactly.
Where did this naturally evolve?
Well, it would be probably the Amur River Valley, I think, in China, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so, yeah.
That would make sense. There's so many rootstocks that were taken from there. And it's a hardy area, so they would have done well in Zone 3 and so forth in North American areas.
And then you got corn and potatoes and that kind of stuff from North and South America. It's just very interesting that we share these things all over the world now, but they all have an origin.
Yeah, and some become very invasive. I mean, that's another problem.
Humans think they know better and just move things all around.
Bring it in. Yeah, it happens with not just plant species, right?
Yeah.
So
and it makes me think, like, there is a seed bank somewhere in the world, right?
Yeah, there are several.
Is it Iceland? Is the big one?
Yes. I think it might be Reykjavik. I'm not sure, but there's also another one in the States that it could be Colorado. I'm not sure where it is.
Somewhere deep into a mountain, I'm sure. Yeah.
California, I believe, as well, and there are There is another one in Canada. Well, there's even in Truro, there's a seed bank. So, I mean,
Really?
there are several.
Yeah.
And more are being created, right? Because we need long-term. And a lot of those seeds are just put into long-term freezers, right?
Right.
They're basically
So then when
stored.
did that all start? Probably during the Cold War, I imagine?
I would think,
Because that was the first time humans are like, okay,
Well, the technology has to be there first, right? To
right.
some
But then there
degree.
was a need. It's like we could vaporize
Yeah.
ourselves and have to start again.
But
So
unless
that-
you're growing a lot of those species over and over, there's no guarantee
Right.
until the technology is there to preserve, right, for
Mm-hmm.
long term. But you think up to that period of time of refrigeration and cooling, and
Right.
how would those seeds? But I mean, they found seeds in, I think, at the caveman bean. They found them in clay pots 1,500 years ago, and we're growing those right now.
Wow.
1,500-year-old caveman bean, they call it.
That's
So
cool.
that's the
very-
seed survived that long.
Oh yes.
Wow.
So well, we've germinated sweet peas from my wife's great grandfather in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Percy Proudfoot was his name. All of his sons were pilots, by the way, in the war. That's another story. But those seeds were at the bottom of a trunk, and Kathy, my wife, her mother said, "Do you want these seeds? They're from my mother." And we looked at the envelope, and it said, "My dearest May, some seeds and violas from the summer, 1912." It said.
Wow.
So we looked, and Kathy says, "What are these sweet peas? They had all shrunk, and there's this big envelope of them." I said, "No, those are sweet peas. They're not shot from." And we grew them, tried to grow them. Nothing happened. I put them in the refrigeration. I scarified them, pre-soaked them in chamomile tea. So like everything possible.
Wow.
And we got 9 seeds
Wow.
that germinated.
That is
Because
so
of the
cool.
way they were stored in a plastic, there was an envelope in a plastic Ziploc type of bag. It wasn't Ziploc, but it was something like that.
Pre-Ziploc.
At the bottom of a trunk,
Yeah.
no light, perfect conditions. Otherwise, there's no way we probably would have got those over almost 100 years. I mean,
So amazing. They're just dormant in a
and
trunk.
but we're finding it hard to keep them going. It's
Yeah.
taking time,
Yeah.
right?
Well, they're just figuring shit out again.
They are. Hey, last
Like,
time
whoa, you just
last-
woke me up. Give me a minute.
Last time we were in Superior here,
Why-
and here we are in the Maritimes.
Why do you
What-
soak them in chamomile tea? They need espresso.
Yeah.
So
No kidding.
I mean, different species must have different likelihood to survive things like that, right? There must be.
for sure, and that's seed coat related. Yeah, it's a good point because if you've got a very thick seed coat on a seed, it's likely to have a longer viability, the endosperm inside, because it's protected. But again, it's about those conditions. I mean, you think of the seed bank in the soil. How come seeds, weeds never go away, right? Because they can be stored. And it's only under ideal conditions, opportunistic conditions, that some weeds will come up. You won't see certain things for years. And
That's true.
Right? And all of a sudden,
back.
hey, this weed is back again. And then it can become invasive for a short period of time, right?
But I mean, a seed must naturally be pretty resilient because a lot of seeds have
Yes.
evolved to be consumed by an animal,
Right.
pooped out somewhere else.
That's the nature
And-
of distribution
Yeah.
and regeneration,
They're
absolutely.
wildly different though, because some seeds are quite big, some are tiny little things as well, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it must vary wildly. Like,
Well, it's a species-related thing. You think of Amaranthaceae species. There's a weed called the redroot pigweed, right? And there's other flowers in the amaranth family. One flower head has 10,000 seeds.
Wow.
So it's considered a warm-loving weed, invasive weed for the most part, redroot pigweed. It's not that competitive, but it can be under certain conditions. And so that you think about that, letting that plant go to seed, it's going to regenerate for the rest of its existence. Pretty hard to eradicate something like
I
that,
bet.
right? So
Things like dandelions blow in the
Right,
air, or
yeah.
burdock gets stuck on an animal's fur.
Totally,
it's
right.
so cool how nature's figured out.
and then it's also an economic thing if you think about Velcro, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
I can't remember the Swiss. I guess it was an entrepreneur. I don't think he was a botanist, but he saw the burdock on the dog, right? He said, "Wait a minute, this would hold just about anything
Yeah.
together, right?"
and he was right.
Yeah,
And he was, yeah, kidding.
it's pretty cool. So, could you give us, me and the folks at home, I'm sure you have opinions about genetically modified food and that whole thing with the Roundup and all that stuff. I mean, that's something I've been listened to some podcasts and read about a little bit, but I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Well,
like
we
what's
just-
happened with
yeah.
our food supply.
We just
to
stay
get
far away from it for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
There's a-
Well, I would imagine that that's like your enemy kind of thing in a way. Like probably a lot of what you do is in response
it's
to
economics,
this.
right?
Yeah.
It's created for mass food production.
Yeah.
And that's why those products have been used. I remember working in university when I was finishing my degree, and canola breeding was becoming a big issue. I was offered a position with a big company at the time. Greenhouses were coming in. The name was everywhere in the university, and I said, no, thank you. I'm going to sign a record deal instead and tour the world. So that's what I did.
There you go.
And finished my ag degree and both degrees actually. And at that time, and I thought, boy, this is 1999. I think it was 99, and the food system was changing right then and there, and that was a direct result of one or two major corporations controlling the food supply. And so genetically modified food.
Well, just explain to people what that is. Some people
Well,
may not understand.
The genetics are altered for certain traits, right? It can be done in a way that's not so damaging, but sometimes it's done where it's done with chemicals.
Right.
So Roundup Ready canola.
Right.
If you're, think of Roundup Ready wheat. Well, boy, that wheat matured at the same time. How'd that happen? Right. Well, it has the genetic selection to mature at the same time because it can be sprayed with Roundup, which is the active ingredient being glyphosate. Right.
Right. So what I understand, Roundup, glyphosate, it basically kills plants. Right. It breaks down the cell structure.
It breaks the root. It busts the root. Basically,
right.
Is what
so
happens.
then it's because weeds will rob nutrients and water and sunlight from plants. So that what they do, they'll spray the property with this stuff that basically kills everything.
It kills everything unless the plant has been designed
And they
to
make a
withstand
plant
it.
that can withstand it.
Exactly.
Right. And they'll plant that in there.
Whether it be monocot or dicot, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And then I think a lot of the argument is that these plants have been modified so radically and so quickly that sometimes our bodies haven't really adapted to digest that or consume that.
Sure, that's a big
But then
part of it.
also the glyphosate in the soil doesn't really go away. At first, I think they used to spray it before planting, and then they would spray it during planting. And then with the wheat, I know they realized that they can spray it just a few days before harvest, and it helps dry out the grains of wheat.
We were told, I was thinking in my last
So
year.
now we're consuming this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we were told in my last year of agriculture, I remember this in the fourth year, that it's not persistent in the soil.
Yeah.
20 years later, they're finding it's everywhere.
And people that have worked with this stuff are dying of strange cancers.
Absolutely. It's highly carcinogenic wheat. That has been proven.
Yeah.
And yet we're still fighting this thing, right?
And I think around 2005, 2006, and like the early 2000s is when they started spraying the crops later and later, and even up like just before harvest time, because they realized they put this chemical on there, it dries it up quicker. You're not getting the mold and stuff like that, and it's easier to harvest it.
It's uniformity,
and that's around the same time everyone started to have gluten problems. And you got to wonder, do we have a gluten problem or do we have a poison in our food problem?
There's two theories on it, and
Yeah.
I certainly think that might be something to think about. I also think that if you look at wheat, for example, in the 1960s and 70s, it doesn't seem to bother too many people. Okay, now that is also not sprayed with glyphosate.
Right.
And then you start looking at breeding programs in highly hybridized wheat, which has higher amount of gluten, like through the roof. So if you have a stomach of steel, you can digest it. Some people have evolved. Their stomachs are different than others. There's 2 or 3 different stomach types, I believe.
Yeah.
And I would say most people have issues with the wheat now because it's so highly hybridized and there's so high content of gluten.
And so what they would do is they would develop a wheat that could grow more dense,
That's right, yeah.
shorter, right? I believe so it didn't blow over and stuff like that.
That and higher yielding.
And
of course,
higher
right?
yield, because the taller the blade is, like what would be the term? The stalk. And if it has too much on it, it's going to fall over. So it would be a shorter, stockier.
Yeah, it's resistant to lodging and all sorts of things. Yeah.
So they're changing this food so fast.
Well, and we're not adapting quick enough, right?
Right.
Would you remember the story when we first sent loaves of bread to Asian countries? It was Chinese or Japan, I can't remember what it was, and they were all getting sick in the 60s and 70s because they had never eaten it before.
Yeah. Their bodies hadn't evolved
Right.
to that, yeah.
And so
I think a lot of indigenous folks have a hard time with things like dairy and gluten and things like that as well.
And which becomes, and you got to remember too, I think if it's deficient, if the soil's deficient, the plant doesn't have it. This is where I think so many people forget. If you have no magnesium left in your soil, it's all tied up. Because of the synthetic fertilizer use, for example, that plant, it's not available for the plant. So even though you can still grow that plant in a substrate or a medium, it doesn't mean it has any nutritional property to it. Like you say, the 8-to-1. Okay, I'll eat 8 to get the nutritional benefits of 1 that's grown in organic soil that has an available nutritional display.
And if the food you're consuming is soaked in these poisons that kills plants, there's a lot of theories that affects our microbiome, because your stomach is filled with all these bacteria, dozens of breeds of bacteria, and sometimes that glyphosate can kill those and destroy your ability to digest them. So microbiome is something that's so important. I have a friend who's a professor at MIT who specializes in microbiomes. I'm hoping to have him on the show sometime.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Really interesting, yeah.
Hear that.
But with all the toxins and poisons in our world, I think our microbiomes are seriously disturbed.
Well, I have a friend who's an MD in Alberta, just outside of Edmonton. He said that one thing that he's been really interested in is the depletion of magnesium in people. He's seeing it on the nutrition itself. Yeah. We're not getting enough nutrition, and it's causing so many secondary illnesses, anxiety, those kinds of mental, just issues with people that they can't understand. Yeah. The vagus nerve, he talked about that with me, and I wasn't too aware of what that was all about. He said, but controlling your stomach and understanding, who you are and what you're doing and breathing, all those kinds of things that go with well-being. He said, what happens is food creates a high amount of anxiety in people if it's not nutritional. Right. And he says it's a complex web, but he's doing more and more studies on magnesium because he was quite interested in type 2 diabetes. I guess that's where he did a lot of his work. And understanding that magnesium seems to reverse early type 2 diabetes. He says, I don't have all the answers, but I'm doing more and more research on it. And he's in his 60s now, and that's all he's doing.
My sister is big on magnesium. She knows all the different types. She was quite sick for a while and was really studying some things. She has baths in it. She'll put it in her bath water, soak it in, eat it. She's done a lot of research on that kind of stuff. Yeah, she found it has a big help. And vitamin D is huge too. I think vitamin D and magnesium are two very simple supplements.
And calcium needs to be a part of those three. Yeah. I don't know all the dynamics of how one shuffles the other around, but it's not that much different in plants, guys. Yeah. The physiology in plants is similar, right? You can't uptake, you get deficiencies. In fruit, you can see it. Yeah. If the soil is depleted in something, we're no different, right? But if you're consuming those foods that are deficient, then you're also going to be deficient, and it only makes sense, right?
Well, it's so clear that we're sicker than we've ever been, physically
I agree with you,
mentally.
100%.
And doctors don't know anything about nutrition. I've asked them. Every time I see a doctor, I'll say, well, how much did you study about nutrition? Very, very little, like a day. They don't really know a lot.
So much other stuff to do, and all the hospital policies and everything like that. They need to know all of that stuff.
But
there's no room for that.
We'd probably be a lot healthier if we had better nutrition. A friend of mine was upset one day that she had to wait 6 hours to see a doctor. I said, we need more doctors. We need more doctors. I said, what if we had fewer sick people? She goes, no, we need more doctors. I said, listen to what I'm saying. What if we had fewer sick people? No, we need more doctors. I give up trying to explain this. Yeah. But I think if we had proper nutrition and mental health, we wouldn't need all the doctors. And wouldn't that be better? Yeah. Wouldn't it be better to have a proper meal and a walk in the sunshine and enjoy your life than to sit in a waiting room and get a pill?
Well, essentially, that's what happens.
That's what happens.
I have seen people. I was thinking we flew to Phoenix, and I saw an individual, going through customs and whatnot, and they had a Ziploc bag full of medication, and then another one. Yeah. And then a third one. Yeah. And they weren't sure which one was which, and they were all anxious and confused, the elderly gentleman, and he finally just said, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what's what. Yeah. Because they're going through it with them. And it's like, I can't imagine living like that.
So sad. You got big food companies that are selling us food with nothing good in it.
No.
It's an empty shell. But then you have pharmaceutical companies that are probably all owned by the same people selling us pills to make up for our bad health. And it's
bothers me.
Well, what stock would you own if you owned a pharmaceutical company?
You don't want people healthy.
I mean, it's just that simple,
It's
isn't
that
it?
simple. And well, in the big Black Rocks and these big companies, they own all these companies.
Their bottom line is profit. We know that.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed
No, they don't care.
in 100 years.
Yeah.
But it's easier for them to make profit if
Right.
they can force us to make us to become less healthy.
And it's built into the system. If you are a CEO, you have one job, and that is to bring profits to your shareholders. By law, that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
If you have a choice between, okay, do the people need healthy food or do my shareholders need profits? His job title and by law, he's supposed to do whatever brings profits
Absolutely.
to the shareholders. Help people's health be damned. And then when you have 100 years of that, well, it's no wonder where we're at.
It's an ethical question for a lot
It
of
is
these
an ethical question.
business people, and a lot of them can't stand who
And we
they are
don't
and
know
what
that.
they do.
We think
Yeah.
that Pfizer or Moderna or the big food companies, Monsanto's, we think that they have our best interests in mind. They don't.
No, but there are people running these companies that also have to sleep at night. I believe.
Yes, but the law says their number one job is to make profits.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
It always has been.
Always has been. But the public doesn't understand that.
Well, I think we are more and more, though.
I think
I would
you're
agree
right.
that people
I think
are
you're
way
right.
more aware, and that might be a COVID thing too.
Yes.
You see a complete rebellion on the whole idea.
Oh, yeah.
This is not something that just happened by accident.
No.
And so everybody has a different opinion that I've talked to, but
Mm-hmm.
the reality is that there was a profit made on getting injected. So let's.
Yeah. And then all the other
We don't know
things-
what it was, but
all the other things like we could be, there's so many better ways to be healthy.
Right.
When I was I'm running a restaurant during COVID, I'm stressed out because half my staff didn't come to work because they could take the money and stay home. But I have mortgages and debts and staff. I'm running a restaurant with half my staff, so I'm working 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
I'm stressed out. I'm tired. I'm not eating. I'm so stressed, and I lost weight, and I'm full of pain. All my joints, all my muscles, I'm in pain. I've lost weight. I'm down to 185 pounds. I'm 6'6". I'm 205 now, but I was 20 pounds lighter. I was miserable. My eyes were sunken. My cheeks were sunken. So much pain. I keep going to the doctors. They thought I had Lyme disease. They checked me over and over again. They thought I had some other diseases.
Oh, you
Then-
got to see a doctor here?
yeah, well, I had to wait it for hours. But then my partner at the time, she was doing a workout thing. Yeah. She was doing a workout thing, and she was had a phone app logging her food.
Okay.
And I'm like, she's half my size, and she's eating more than me. And I'm like, okay, maybe I need to get this app too. And then I didn't realize I was not eating nearly enough, not nearly enough protein, not nearly enough fats. I had no idea. I thought because I ate relatively healthy food and I wasn't overweight, I
Yeah.
thought I was good. But it completely transformed my life. Once I had enough protein and fats and brought the carbs down, the pains went away.
Absolutely.
My belly went away. My muscle grew. My focus was improved. So much better. And I was so shocked that I could be so naive about nutrition. I had no clue. And then I finally went back to the emergency room for something else. I think I cut myself or something. And then I saw the doctor that had tried to put me on antidepressants because of my sore ankles. So I have pain because I'm starving myself. And they said, well, we could put you on these antidepressants. I'm like, but I'm not depressed. Yeah, but sometimes antidepressants can help with soreness.
You will be by the end of this.
I will be,
appointment.
and all I really needed was a burger and a salad,
Yeah.
and to get out in the sunshine more. And our healthcare system is not aware of that. They're not set up for that. We could save ourselves probably hundreds of millions of dollars if we would help people on the front end to get better food. Like we say all the time, we should tax the bullshit food, the sugars and the bullshit. And we should take that for education for people and to subsidize farmers. And a tomato should be cheaper than a Joe Louis. I would love to see, and we'd be a happier, healthier, more productive society.
But you're talking about North America, and if you spend any time,
I think start with Nova Scotia.
Yeah, but if you spend any time in Europe, you'd see that that's what's
what we're doing.
happening.
Yeah, that's what's
and it
happening,
has been
yeah.
happening for a while, particularly in areas, in Spain and Italy, and I know this, and we are leagues behind because we're allowing this facade.
Here, where we have public health care, it would be in the government's best interest to have healthier people. There'd probably be less people, missing work. There'd probably be less people
off because of injuries and
But
mental health.
that is a big kind of driver for the whole thing in Europe, is that trying to reduce the burden on healthcare system. That is true.
Yeah.
Right.
We could be.
We have no choice, so we're going to have to do something.
We're going to have to.
It's not just Nova Scotia that faces this crisis in healthcare.
Right.
It is countrywide. I think of my father trying to get in not long ago, and there was a time he said I could call my doctor, and I could go to the emergency room, and I would see somebody within a few hours. He sat there for 14 hours. And this is near Winnipeg, so it's not what it used to be.
No. But when I was a kid, the doctor used to come to your house.
Absolutely. I
now.
remember, I barely remember it, but I do remember that. I remember my mother saying, Dr. Luckert, he's coming over to take a look at you, see what's going on with you.
But I think we could be much happier and healthier if we would do health care on the front end. Like my dad says all the time, we don't have health care, we have sick care.
Right.
Yeah, we'll
It's not
maybe
proactive
patch
ever.
you together after you've fallen apart. But what is there to help us, before that?
Yeah, you think of, I'm trying to think, it's Polyface Farm. You might be familiar with Joe Slanton, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was cutting edge 25 years ago, telling people, wait a minute, why is the government telling me I cannot do this outside and look at what they're doing inside? How is that right? How is this wrong?
Yeah.
This is what we did for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you're trying to shut me down?
Yeah,
And these are
because the big businesses
exactly.
have manipulated things for their own best
But he
interest.
created the demand.
Yeah.
His customers are countrywide because they know how he's producing his food, and they feel better when they eat it. Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that. And we see so much like grocery prices going through the roof. There's only basically two big grocery companies in our country. They control the food supply.
It's funny, my wife and I said this the other day. We go to the grocery store, we only shop in one aisle. What are the other 38?
Yeah.
What do they have? We can't eat it. We won't eat it.
Yeah, because who knows what's in it? You can't pronounce it. Can't
It's
even read
pretty
it.
scary, though, when you think about
Yeah.
it. So we're in and out of there, in if we go at all,
Yeah.
in 10 minutes.
Oh, that must be nice.
I stick to the outside aisles as much as possible. Not many things I get that comes in a box or a can or anything like that.
There are very few
Yeah.
that you feel like you can purchase at times, and so we don't do dairy
Yeah,
at
me either.
home, and so oat milk is always something that works for us, or almond, and but sometimes that manufacturer can give you a product that's not so nice.
Well, they had a recall on some of that stuff recently.
Yeah, they did. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Had to dump it down the sink. That was upsetting.
Oh, geez. You
Yeah.
had one of those, did
I
you?
had.
Yeah.
Well, it was around the right time.
Yeah. Well,
I-
good for you.
I made soup with it once. I'm like, well, I didn't die, but maybe my mom was like, you need to get rid of that.
You boiled it long enough to get rid of whatever.
Yeah, I think I made muffins with it.
Was it listeria? I don't even know.
Yeah, I think it was listeria.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the more things are stepped on and processed, and the more equipment it touches, and the more hands it touches, probably chances are the less healthy it is for you.
Absolutely.
You need to have something that has one ingredient.
Or to mitigate against that potential, there's basically nothing left in it.
Yeah,
A nutritional side, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
It's like we always used to say, like, it's like eating cardboard, right? A lot of it is.
yeah.
And this.
Well, if you talk to any early educators in the school system, they'll tell you that things have changed a lot with behavior of children, and
Yeah.
it's not so much a sociological thing, but probably diet is what they more and more feel like they're just not. These kids don't have. They're lacking B complex. They're lacking. It's what they're eating.
Well, we're
fed.
sicker in every way. Diabetes is through the roof.
Yeah.
ADHD and autism and all these things are through the roof.
And in animals too.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay, that's
What is going on?
inflammation.
Inflammation
The root
is
of all
is
evil,
a
right?
huge thing, yeah. And that's probably many things, but I'm sure diet's a big part of that.
It's sometimes it's social media. It can
Yeah.
be integrated into that too. That people
Yeah.
are just constantly absorbed with
Well,
who
anything
they're,
that
who they're
just
not,
has your stimulated all
Yeah.
the time and anxious all the time, it's not good. I mean, people are not having as much sleep as they used to have, stuff like that. Yeah,
Well, worrying about bills, worrying
Mm-hmm.
about those kinds of things. You're on this planet, for a very short period of time. When you think about it.
yeah,
I think of my grandfather who lived to about 85 or 86, and he says, I'll be damned if I'm going to sit in the house. And there he was with a catheter on the tractor, hanging off the edge, right into the gear shift, the PTO. It's like, jeez. But that was,
respect it, though.
there's no way you're going to take him down.
Gotta
He said, I'm
respect
going
it,
to
yeah.
do what I love to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to sit
Yeah.
in a home or whatever it was. And he said, you put me in that manure pile. That's where you put me. He said, at least I can provide something in the end.
And what are the things that we remember? You're going to remember, this time you spent doom scrolling, or you're going to remember, I've been, the last few weeks I've been decided, I'm just going to go with my whims. I'm just going to follow my intuition.
We've all done it.
If I decide, if I get a notion to go swim in a waterfall, I have to now. Like, if the idea crosses my mind, I go do it. And I've been so much happier that way. You know what I mean? Like, if I think I'm just going to go build a campfire, I don't say, well, yeah, but I should be working or I should do this. I just do it.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that for a couple of weeks, and it is amazing because I used to spend so much time with anxiety, questioning my decisions or second guessing things. And it's like, no, I'm just going to.
Well, when you
If I
want to,
think I'm going to go to a
yeah.
concert, I go to a concert.
If you want to and you can't,
Yeah.
if you want to and you constantly tell yourself you can't,
Yeah.
think
Well,
of
you shouldn't.
think what that builds up over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really interesting part of the world we live in now, a place to be between generations too. This is a bit of a different diversion here, but honestly, dealing with, what are they, Gen Zs and millennials, because I'm an X, I guess, in my early 50s, but noticing the gap, it was easy for me to deal with my parents and vice versa. Now, that's different.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot different.
Yeah.
A 55-year-old dealing with a 25-year-old is
Yeah.
way different than
Totally
a
different
75-year-old
world.
dealing with a 50-year-old.
Yeah.
It's a different world, right?
Where their brains were trained during social media and internet and all that
Absolutely.
kind of stuff. Yeah.
And then the whole idea of the nutritional differences.
Yeah.
I don't remember my food being so devoid like that, in the 70s and 80s as a kid. I noticed that when I was studying in school. I noticed the change. I think it came about 1995, 96, when we really noticed that processing part of the food, the nutritional value starting to deplete. I think it's just a period of time where there's so much heavy use, synthetic use on the soil structures by then, there's nothing left.
And a lot more industrialization and
Right.
everything, right?
It catches up to us, and maybe it's earlier than that, but it seems to be a real thing. It's becoming harder to buy nutritional food by the mid-90s. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
And as a touring artist back then, touring around the world, trying to eat healthy,
Oh, yeah.
I loved going to Europe.
Yeah. I
It
bet.
was so easy,
Yeah.
so easy to go and tour through all, Stoke-upon-Trent
Yeah.
and all these places, and Nottingham, and
Yeah.
out to Wales, to Cardiff, and we
Cool.
could eat healthy.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, same thing. So I would come back and go, what is going on here?
Garbage.
All I can get in Wawa, Ontario is a Tim Hortons. This isn't right. Little towns in Europe, you can eat like a gourmet restaurant. It's strange.
It is strange.
But
All
it's
about profit.
and different people's different perceptions of what's good food as well. Because something I noticed very much when coming to North America in particular is suddenly you go to a restaurant, everyone cares about the portion size above anything else.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Like we wouldn't go out to eat. When I lived in London, we never went out to eat just to get full. We went out to eat because we wanted to have an experience,
It's
have a
the
couple of
social-
drinks, and talk with our
puppies.
friends.
Yeah, right.
But here, people go out to eat because they're going to have a good meal and they want their portion of fries. And if they don't eat it at the time, they're going to take it home with them. That's completely foreign to me. Because I want, this is lovely. You get a very small portion, but that's fine.
It's so true,
Yeah.
thinking of that because of where you're from. I remember going to the pubbies, as they say, and the whole family would go there after work or after school. They all go in Europe, right? That's where they go. It's
To
a
the pub.
social,
Yeah.
that's their place to be because they don't want to sit in the flat all night, right? It's a different culture,
It's
different
that
way of
third
life.
space, they call it.
Yeah.
There's work, there's home, and then there's the cafe or the pub or whatever.
Yeah, it's a North American culture it has to evolve, I think, before. I don't know how though. When people are working, I know people that work 3 or 4 jobs to pay that mortgage, especially as of late with the bank rate. What happened in Canada? I know some people that personally that were working 18 to 20 hours a day between that. That can't last very long
No, you
before it
can't.
takes its toll on somebody.
That's
right?
not sustainable at all.
No, and it's not, and it's not a isolated thing.
No.
It's happening to a lot of families. And so you've got kids, and you've got both mom and dad working 2 jobs, paying for whatever, childcare. There's such a dissociation and disconnect between what's happening. I think that's
And it's a struggle to keep a roof over the head, and a struggle
It sure
now to
is.
keep the car going,
Yeah.
and power and heat, and just to have something on the table.
Yeah.
And now we're telling folks that the cheap stuff on the table probably has no nutrition and is probably making you sick.
Grow your own food.
So you got to grow your own food. And one good thing we do have in the valley here is there's so much great product. Like there's
good
local
access to
butchers,
markets, yes.
there's local farm markets, and it is cheaper a lot of times than what you can get at,
And
the,
you
at
have-
the big
you
stores.
have- yeah, and you
don't
have-
have to grow it yourself.
No,
You just
and you-
maybe have to make another stop besides the grocery stores.
And you think of institutions like FarmWorks,
Yeah.
CEDIF, right, that support sustainability.
Yeah.
They get it.
Yeah, they get it.
A lot of the other so-called institutions don't
Yeah.
care. Their bottom line is cash flow and profit,
Right.
whereas FarmWorks gets it. Oh, you can do this, and let's talk.
Like with my restaurant here, I don't buy everything from the big food producer, providers.
Right.
We work with Gordon Food Services, and they're great, but most things we buy from them are like spices and oils and stuff like that. Like I stop in Diobins in Bridgetown and I pick up my meat. I go to the, Birch Street in Digby and get the fish. I go to Spur Brothers and get the potatoes. Anywhere I can get something local, I get it. And I think, because I want people to support me as a local business, but I want to support them. I think it's better product. But also, I'm a little bit nervous about where the world's going and when the supply chains were happening. I know that like Diobin, some of these guys were getting inundated with because when people saw the meat department empty, they started to go to Diobin's. But if I've been supporting them for years, and now they have a whole bunch of new strangers coming in, who are they going to be more loyal to? They're probably going to be more loyal to the person that was there for them
Small
before.
family business.
The small family business that supported them before the crisis.
Incidentally, I taught the youngest, Jacob.
Yeah,
I did a year of English in high school at Bridgetown. Just
Good
filled in, this was the COVID year.
Yeah.
So I never went past March or whatever it was, but good family kid.
Very good family, yeah.
Understood he says, we got to do this stuff today. I got to go. I got stuff to do at home,
Yeah.
I said, yeah, you're not feeling well, are you? Go.
But it's about relationships, right? Like you don't necessarily have to grow the pig yourself or grow the corn yourself, but if you have a personal relationship with the person who did,
Yeah.
that's a little more security than most. Because if you go to the grocery store and there's going to be some person there making minimum wage, they're going to do that. They're going to shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, sorry, tough.
And
But
they're
if you
probably going to starve too.
have a long relationship with someone who's actually growing the food, you have somewhat
You
of a
have to
chance
understand the cycle, though, right? A lot of growers, I'm saying a lot, but most do, but some don't. So, I'm thinking of somebody, I'm not going to say who they are, an organic farm, trying to source manure. It's not easy.
there. Yeah.
They did find some because it was grass free range, but they were also given antibiotics, those animals, and they didn't know that.
And now it's in the soil.
And it got them, and so they were.
Yeah.
It's so now it showed on the testing, they registered. That's how prevalent it was,
Yeah.
right? So, it's a tough thing because you have to you can make a mistake quite quickly, right? And we're not registered as an organic seed producer, but everything we do is done through organic production
Right.
practices. I
You
wouldn't
don't
do it
have to
any
stamp,
other way.
but
No,
yes.
we wouldn't do it
Yeah.
any other way.
Yeah.
Because that's not what we want to do, and we don't want to work in it.
Like we have such an opportunity here in Nova Scotia to make a surplus of food,
Yes,
more than what we need.
I think we're
So
probably
if there
only,
ever is a crisis, we're set.
And so much of that land sits idle.
Oh yeah,
And
so
good,
much.
good fertile land
Yeah.
that could be put into production.
My property's 6 acres, and my garden's the size of this room. But it used to be a functioning farm.
But you could expand.
Oh, it could, yeah.
But I'm just thinking of a lot of times, there are growers that want more land so that they can produce a sustainable level, and they can't get the land because nobody wants to get rid of it. Well, if you what they'll probably do in this province, like every other province, is start putting property tax on farmland, ALR land, and once that happens, okay, I'll lease it to you. Well, you'll start seeing a change, and that land may become more productive.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Hear the jets going over the air
Yeah.
show. The air show.
is that what
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, because we don't.
So welcome to the air show.
Well, we're not far. We get them out in Port George too. Yeah, that's
It's
interesting.
not usually jets here, but they're coming in for the weekend. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Wow. I first year we were up there in the North Mountain, we had a Sea King helicopter come over at night with the searchlights, and I think, what is this, right? You know, just finished watching X-Files here. And here's this helicopter doing the training exercises on the coast. They drop, you know, markers in and so forth, and we were going, oh, what is going on here, you know? Anyway.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, no, I love having, like, a lot of our regular customers here are Air Force guys. It's awesome.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
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 No,
Let's just hope that we don't need them to go to war. Worry a lot about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we want to have them and not need them.
Yes.
It always seems precarious, doesn't it, that in the blink of an eye, something could happen globally that
Yeah.
we would, yeah.
Well, we're closer to that than ever, it seems.
Well,
all
even
the tensions.
in areas that we don't expect, like the Arctic or the, you know,
Yeah.
it's, I know you can't turn a blind eye on it. It is a reality. And so we have to, unfortunately, be prepared, I think, at times for those kinds of problems.
It's funny, we're talking about things now in the 2020s that happened in the 1920s, the 19-teens, you know, like pandemics we never thought we'd have to deal with, and more world wars, and now we're dealing with, like, fears of, like, the nuclear tensions are higher than they've been since the 1960s. Like, these cycles come around and around, and it's food insecurity. Like, we never really worried about these things, but these cycles come around.
Let's not forget how climate is a big part of that. I mean, as a grower, it's our biggest challenge.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a meteorologist in Environment Canada, and he said, listen, Nova Scotia, the best forecast you're going to get is 12 hours. I said, why is that, Neil? He says, well, there's so much upper atmospheric moisture now, and we find that lower pressure systems, when they approach land, they kind of stall out more than they ever used to. So we can't really tell how much precipitation until it's starting to happen. He says it's really different. He says,
being on the coast with all the jet streams,
that's what
and
he
all that
said.
stuff.
Yeah, he all kinds of things he kind of talked about. But he said in the region you live in, particularly northeastern part of North America, is much more difficult.
Yeah.
You know, to predict what's happening. But he did say, he said, upper atmospheric moisture is something that's really, really high. And so as systems change, as they come through, it's very difficult for them. So,
Oh, there's definitely changes going on.
There's no
Things
doubt
are so
about it.
different. I remember ice skating before Christmas when I was a kid. Now you
Yeah.
can barely ice skate at all.
well, I grew up
It's
in
like cold.
southern Manitoba, so that was never an issue. For 5 months, we could play an outdoor hockey rink. Never a problem. I had a pond in the back of the farm property, and I could. It was 2 feet thick, the ice, and I would put fence posts in and shoot pucks against barbed wire or chicken wire things. You know, it was like not a problem.
No, but
Here,
it's
I
different
don't
now.
think I don't think the ponds have frozen over for about
Wow.
6 winters now.
Probably.
You know, maybe once. I mean, 3 years ago we had a couple of cold February days, but that's so short-lived, right?
Yeah.
So winters are, and this is a thing with insect pests, by the way. I'm not going to get into this in detail, but you know, you need those cold periods to sort of kill some of the higher densities, populations of certain things.
Yeah.
If you're not getting that, you can end up with some real threshold issues the following winters. And it's managing that integrated pest management is another big thing, and it's climate related, right?
Because bugs have been very different in the last sort of 5 years or something, haven't they? I've been reading a lot of stuff about that.
Well, all species. I mean,
Yeah.
you think of follow songbirds. I mean, in ornithology, from that perspective, if you think about songbirds, how they're changing their range, they're constantly moving north to breed, right?
Yeah.
Well, along with that, everything else moves too, right? And so the weather moves,
Things are shifting and
latitudinally
changing.
rise, right?
It's going to change economics. It's going to change so many things.
Well,
I don't know if have
There's
you
some
heard-
positives though too, because we can grow. We can grow now.
Yeah.
You know, certain types of peppers that are 120-day pepper that we never would have grown 8-9 years ago. Even why is this? Maybe it'll change. I don't know if it's short term, but there's something to it.
If things are warming and changing, we're going to have to adapt with it because there's no way to stop it suddenly. So we're going to have to. And humans are great at adapting with things. I don't know if you saw. Have you heard of the documentary The Grab?
No.
You can find it on YouTube.
The
Did
Grab,
you watch it?
okay.
Have you watched it, man?
I've got it bookmarked.
Yeah, The Grab. So it's on YouTube. You got to pay for it. But it's this journalist spent 7 years researching food supplies and all these major governments. Like we're talking about like CIA and China and Saudi Arabia and all these countries are jockeying for position for things like water rights and all
that's
these
been
things.
happening for
Oh
years.
yeah, but there's like some dark stuff going on behind the
Aquifer
scenes.
accesses, right?
Yeah, like something like you wouldn't think of. Like Vladimir Putin has been hiring cowboys from America as fast as he can over the phone. Not him personally, but
Right.
they, as the global warming is happening, some of the northern parts of Russia are opening up these meadows and this place where they can now raise cattle. They want Russia to be a huge cattle growing place because as the climate changes, so they're buying up American cowboys to raise beef in Russia because they want to be the biggest beef producers. And you got Saudi Arabians buying land in America and drilling deep, like using like oil drilling technology
For
to get the
aquifer,
water
yeah, absolutely.
to grow alfalfa to bring back there to grow protein for their people. And China and all these countries, because China has to import either 90% of their food or food inputs to feed their people. 90%. And we don't realize, like, the governments know you can't control hungry people. Your people need food. And the climate's shifting and changing, and these governments are doing some shady things to secure this, secure these food stocks.
When you see the Bush administration dropping their interest in oil and looking at fresh water,
Yeah.
that 22 years ago that happened,
Yeah.
by the way, with
And
aquifers.
Canada
That
is
should have been our
wealthy for
first
water.
red flag.
Canada has the most fresh water in the world.
Still,
I believe.
yes.
Yeah.
But that can all change quickly.
It could all change really quickly.
So,
We could
especially
find ourselves invaded if things get bad enough.
Who knows? Like
Who knows?
But I think that will ultimately be one of our biggest challenges as a population, as a species, is access to clean water.
Yeah. And it's not just the water, but agriculture uses the most water.
Yeah.
The most water. So like California grows a lot of stuff, but it's so dry there. Like things like almonds use ungodly amounts of water. Where are they going to get it all? Like saying they don't have grasses and stuff like that to feed the livestock in Europe. So they're in Saudi Arabia and those places. So they're growing it here and shipping it there. Like it's interesting. And that's like a way of transporting water. You're not actually taking tankers of water. Mm-hmm. You're growing grasses and grains here and then taking it there. So it's going to be interesting.
So what does it look like less than 2050?
2050, 25 years? Well, I think populations are going to change. China's going to be very small, I think, because of their one-child policy.
Right.
They're not going to be a big player anymore. I think South America, they're saying, is going to become our manufacturing hub, like Mexico and those countries.
I have heard that becoming, yes.
And America's going to start manufacturing more. So the prediction that I've seen is Canada's going to have a lot of the natural resources. America's going to have a lot of the tech and manufacturing with a large workforce coming from South and Central America. And I think like places like Russia and China, they're going to kind of implode on themselves with population. And I think that's probably why North America is having so much immigration, because they realize we have a population decline. Because we've worried so long about so many people, like 8 billion people. But most people aren't having 10 kids anymore like they used to, right? Yeah. And China had a one-child policy, and there's rumors about Russia invaded Ukraine when they could, because they're not going to have young people to do that 10 years from now. So there's major countries are making their moves now while they have the young population and the soldiers to do these things. But hopefully, if we can avoid nuclear war, things should settle out in the next 10 years, and North America should be in a good position, I think. Because we have pretty good natural growing season. We have an East Coast and a West Coast.
It's diversified for sure.
Yeah. We should be able to grow enough food, but we need to get our manufacturing here.
I wonder if it will be smaller sustainability
I hope.
increasing, or will it be, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is it Schumacher that wrote "Small is Beautiful"?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been the model, I think, for so many sustainable organic growers and people that are aware of the nutritional value of food at the end of the day, and seed and food security.
Well, one really cool thing that we have an opportunity now is someone could have a high-tech job anywhere. With the Starlink and the communications, like you could be an ad executive somewhere or work for whatever, some major company, but you could also live in the country and have your own garden. You don't have to commute. And that's something that
some futurists have talked about maybe here in North America, we should have like smaller little villages and communities where people are living more like Little House on the Prairie, but they're also very high tech and can do a tech job from their living room or from their porch or whatever. And that would be a beautiful thing to see.
And a nice lifestyle.
A
Really.
very nice
Actually,
lifestyle. To make your six figures
Think
from
of
a small
Western,
town.
Western Ukraine, Lviv,
Yeah.
that area. A lot of people live like that.
Yeah.
Families live in these complexes, and they've got their rooftop gardens. They communally share what they're doing. It's happening everywhere. I think my daughter in downtown Toronto, she's in Danforth, that area, and she's got this 8th floor patio with producing a lot of her food right there, in her herb gardens. And I said, is this free for you when you live? It's being promoted. They're building more of them every year.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants them.
Everybody wants it. And you see people flocking to Nova Scotia for that kind of lifestyle.
Where they can have the
Maybe
land
they can
itself,
have a few chickens and a little garden, and they can go hiking and they can go swimming and they can do these things. I think that's, I would like to think, the optimist in me hopes we're going to get a little more back to that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not allowed to have chickens where I live because of politics, but yeah. But it was, I think it was in Belgium, they started giving out chickens to like the population, like to anyone who asked for it, just because it also helps get rid of some waste as well.
Well, maybe they'll give everybody a guinea hen to get rid of wood ticks. I mean, that's another.
Great.
There you go.
See, there you go.
So what is your prediction? What do you see the future?
I agree with you in some ways as well. My thinking is that the climate might be a little bit more severe than we think, the changes. I don't know that we're going to be able to, governments are going to adapt quick enough.
We can't.
Okay, so that's a reality.
And they say we want to have all electric cars by 2030, but the infrastructure's not there.
No,
It's not going to happen.
We sat in a charging station the other day, because we have one, waiting for somebody to move their car that wasn't electric. I mean, it's like, thanks a lot, bud, you know.
Yeah.
Be there in a bit, just getting you a coffee, you know. Like, okay, well, yeah, but we don't want to sit any longer than we have to. But because the other one didn't work in Halifax, it wasn't serviced. And
But like California is saying they're banning gas car sales by 2030, but their power grid browns out now on a hot day when everyone's running their air conditioner. So it's
the
it's not gonna be
infrastructure is
possible.
not close to
The
catching
battery
up.
technology's not there. The
That's the other
infrastructure's
thing,
not
yeah.
there.
In the UK, it's like it's now more expensive to run an electric car than it is to run a gas-powered car.
So we're not going to change that fast. It would probably be damaging to our economy and our social structures if we tried to force it.
Right.
I think right now we're just going to have to adapt to it, and people have done a pretty good job adapting to things. I think we can.
But my question would be, okay, so with these severe weather, I mean, you just look at Connecticut the other day. Was it Oxford, Connecticut? I can't remember. Where buildings are being swept into rivers. New England, okay.
Yeah, well, we've lost people in floods just here
Exactly.
recently in the last 2 years.
I don't
Like
think
flash floods,
these
losing
unprecedented events are. These things happened in the past. I'm not saying they haven't, but we see so many of them now. Now, is that just something because we're so the media? We have the awareness, and
maybe everyone has cell phone footage of things.
but yes and no, right? Because we do know it's a reality.
Yeah.
The extreme events
different.
are a reality. You know, one horrible event, and it can all be. It doesn't take much, right? You've got a volcanic, situation where you've got the flood, you've got an earthquake, you've got a meteor, asteroid, whatever. Who knows? All these things can happen. Doom and gloom, whatever you want to call it. But that aside, the climate is changing in a way that it's making it, and I can tell you this, very difficult to produce food. I don't think it matters what level you're at. Sustainable is easier. It's smaller. We can control it. We can grow undercover. We do probably 70% of our growing undercover now because we can't grow
Undercover just means like greenhouses.
poly hoops and so forth, greenhouses, because we can't grow in the field.
Yeah.
And you'd think, well, why is that? It's because you get 4 inches of rain in 3 hours, and that's it. And then the plants become anaerobic because it's too much water, can't percolate properly, or there's disease infestation. You get powdery mildew, you get septoria, all these, verticillium. Hard to manage that, but if you grow under cover, you can mitigate it. So you can do that on a small scale. You can also do it in a medium to large scale, but it's extremely expensive, right? And you have to have the capital to do that. So what's the solution, in my opinion? If we do become more subjected to these extreme weather events, it's to have you, me, and everybody we know growing at least part of what they eat at any level. at any level, container growing, whatever we can possibly do.
Diversifying things a little bit.
Because that supply chain,
barter as well.
Yeah.
that supply chain is going to go down.
And we saw that kind of thing when we weren't alive, but the whole victory garden thing during the Second World War, right? Like people had every
Right.
little on window boxes and patios, like people were producing whatever they could. And we can do it. It's not that hard. And there's something in us that tells us we need to do this.
We
a
learned-
lot of people are trying to do shit that
Yeah.
we never
Yeah.
thought before. Like,
But we learned
Me.
from COVID what happens when the supply chain's
Yeah.
down.
yeah,
You can't move.
no,
You can't. One thing affects another
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
It's a real vicious cycle, right?
Yeah.
So if that was to happen on a large scale,
Yeah.
where climate was responsible for that, that's even more of a problem, isn't it?
And it's
'Cause you
funny
can't repair that
sometimes-
as fast. You can't just suddenly take a tariff off or whatever it might be.
sometimes a crisis brings an opportunity. Like COVID was a crisis
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And for some people, they realize, well, maybe we don't need all the stuff. Maybe we don't need all the debt. Maybe we can go on one income or a couple half incomes and slow down a little bit. Like I've noticed that.
Mental health.
Mental health, yeah. And maybe this, if there is like a supply chain issue, it'll make us grow our own food. And then lo and behold, maybe we'll be healthier and happier because of it. Sometimes a crisis can be a beautiful opportunity too.
Well, and I think
And a bit of a reset.
absolutely. If a flood's wiping out most of our production from the market
Yeah.
growers, even if you've got enough in your patio or small garden that isn't affected by that inclement weather,
Yeah.
guess what? You've got something.
And I tell you, you will not waste as much food when you've worked your ass off to grow it. Right?
It's true.
It's true. If I go buy cheap stuff, like I had a birthday party a few weeks ago and had made some corn and put it in the fridge, forgot about it, and I throw out 3 or 4 ears of corn. But if I grew that corn, there's no way I was going to let that raw. I've harvested like 2 zucchinis from my garden so far, but I used every inch of that zucchini.
You knew what went into that
Right.
from the inputs of the
Yeah.
of the production side and
Yeah.
and the your physiology, what you did as well, right?
Yeah.
You
So
put the
much
labor
waste.
in for it. Yeah.
There's so much waste from the farms to the grocery stores. And when food is cheap and everywhere, we tend to not value it as much.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Well, it's funny. This morning I went and checked on the spaghetti squash, and I noticed there were about 30 of them eaten by porcupines.
Oh.
And we have netting over them and whatnot. But they're such resourceful creatures, and for some reason they're very hungry. I think there's an explosion of them potentially up in the North Mountain. There's a lot more than I've ever seen. So anyway, they go in and they take a bite of every one until they
bastards.
until they get to the ripest one or that suits their needs, and then they eat that one. Sometimes they get it right in the first or second one, but other times they go from one end to the other until they get to the right one, and they waste too much. But my point is that sometimes you have to grow a lot more in order to have a sustainable harvest rate or something that you can actually. So it's knowing and knowing to plan what you do. If you're a grower, even in your own garden, right? It's can you make those calculations? I wish there was something out there for the average family that could say how many of this do you need to produce to be. There should be an algorithm or some kind of a program. There's got to be.
There must be an app for that somewhere.
Exactly. Absolutely. There's got to be something.
If not, we could write it, I'm sure.
Yeah, you want to do that?
Yeah, I'm up for it.
I think you should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I'm so glad you're doing this, I'm
Well-
glad there's people like you out there.
No, you know what? It's like I said, it's something we think we have to do. It's
Yeah.
not that we want to do
Well,
it.
you go to work every day with a real purpose. right?
Absolutely.
A do or die, life or death, possible purpose.
Yeah, there's a part of that. I always feel
Yeah,
like that. That if we didn't do this, think about how many packets of seeds that aren't growing. Yeah, maybe there's choices people can buy them somewhere else, but there's a good chance that they won't grow well for them. One of the things we're very proud of is that we have almost 100% germination on most of our seeds because we do that. We care. We weren't going to give you something that we don't think is going to grow because we want you to grow. It's important. We want you to be successful what you're doing.
So you have a purpose beyond just profits.
Yeah,
Which is great.
If we wanted to just focus on profit, we'd have 50 people working for us, but now we'd have another 30 sections of land. Who wants to manage that?
Yeah.
Then you lose control. I don't know how you can control it. There's a certain level in the business we're in where you suddenly become lots of multiple things, and it becomes almost impossible to control that quality control.
And then you have to have an HR department and all that stuff.
Yeah, we like to do it. There's 3 of us, and then we have 2 part-time workers, and that's where we like to stay. We might have a few more workers coming in to help us out with the production side, but we're really trying to manage 700 varieties. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot to manage.
That's a lot.
You know, and we don't obviously grow them every year because some seeds store viable for 4 or 5 years, so we can put that into the rotation.
But it's also knowing that and keeping, like you say, keeping the records, right? Because
it's incredible.
you got to be meticulous with that, I'm sure, right? Like,
You have
if
to
you
be,
get it wrong.
Well, my wife is a former accountant, so that's one. She's really good at that.
Bean counter.
Yeah, she did her master's in financial management, accounting, and you know, she didn't like doing it, but she said this really comes in handy with the business, the seed business, because you have to be so meticulously organized, and we still have lots to learning curve with it. There's lots to do. We had a student from SMU this year working with us, and she was very, very analytical, and she enjoyed the process but she was able to help us organize our seed vaults better based on Latin scientific name coding.
Cool.
So it wasn't so much, where is that nasturtium? Should be with the other nasturtium. Well, it's not like that anymore. It's based on numbers and codes. And
Cool.
I go in and I go, where the hell is everything? So I'm learning that, but it's a smart system.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'd love to see it sometime.
anytime.
Yeah, that'd be
come,
cool.
come down to the farm. We're always growing, and we're always willing to have people come take a look
Yeah.
at where your seed's coming from.
Tell folks about your social media so they can check you out and maybe how to locate. You have a shop, online store?
Everything's
How do people-
online. We sell. You can come down as well if you let us know if you know what you want, because we don't have displays set up
Okay.
for most of the year.
But
We do-
mostly online.
It's 90% is online, and you can if you order online, you can also pick it up locally. Just select local pickup and come up. People
Cool.
like the experience sometimes just to come up. We had people come all the way from New Brunswick, PEI,
Wow.
to save $5 shipping. No, it's not what it was. They just wanted
Their
to
carbon
get out.
footprint.
They wanted to get out, right?
Yeah.
So it's www.revivalseeds.ca.
Yeah.
And the social media is the same. So Revival Seeds on Instagram, Facebook.
Yeah, the Instagram page is interesting. I
TikTok
saw
and-
some of your videos. You have some really solid information on there, right?
Some
Like
of it I think
educational
is
stuff.
very, very useful for, sometimes it's just us, blowing off steam outside and trying to find
that's
something
fine.
kind of unique too.
Yeah.
But there's lots of how-to. I
Yeah.
think it's important.
Yeah.
And again, if we find something that's very useful, that it's working for us, we're going to share it.
Yeah.
We're not
Well,
going
that's great.
to hold it within and say,
Yeah.
well, we've got this and you're not going to know. It's the opposite. We don't
Right.
think like that. We never have. We want you to be successful.
Right.
Everybody should. Other seed companies. Okay, guess what? You trying this?
It's good.
Competition is great. It's out there, but we don't view it as a problem.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
like in the early years of the beer business here in Nova Scotia, because probably 8 to 12 years ago, there was a big boom in Nova Scotia with craft beer. And
Sure, yeah.
The early days of the industry, everyone was very helpful. Like we'd have homebrew meetings, and everyone was really, really happy to share information and help each other out and loan each other things and stuff. And it was great. It's beautiful because the passion was for the art,
Yeah.
not for profit.
Sure.
Now, post-COVID,
It's different.
it's a little bit different.
Where's the organic gluten-free beer? I'm still waiting for that to come out of the market.
I don't know, because how do you make a gluten-free beer?
I don't
with
know.
A sorghum, maybe, I think?
Yes,
Yeah, I
that's
think
the
so.
only one
But is
I've
it
been
good?
able. No,
I don't know.
The first one's good.
The first one's
Like
good?
the first bit of it. Like
Yeah.
I think there's one. It's the only one I've actually enjoyed was I think it's a Whistler. Comes from Whistler.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, okay.
It's got a good aftertaste, but by the time you get to the second one, I find it a little harder. It doesn't matter what
know,
gluten. It's not a great thing. I stopped drinking beer because of it.
Oh. Yeah.
I
I know
see.
there's some additives you can put in it that make the gluten kind of clump together and fall to the bottom.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. It's not recommended for like severe celiac people, but it
Right.
does get like a lot of it.
So would you recommend for somebody if they just wanted to have a beer once in a while, a light pale ale, would that be less likely to cause them issues? Or
And the lower the alcohol, the less grain, the better off you'd probably
okay,
be.
that too.
But I question putting some of these chemicals in there that's just going to clump up the stuff too. So you might be getting
Is that
less
what-
gluten, but you're getting
oh.
more chemicals. Do you know what I
geez,
mean?
Which would probably kick my butt in the end too,
knows,
because
yeah.
I'm so clean as a
Right.
in a forager that I don't. Oh wow,
Yeah,
tough one.
it is a tough one.
Because I do enjoy the.
Wine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do have some red wine once in a while. Not much.
But that
though.
has, what's in wine? They take It's like fish bladder. What do they call that? It's gly something.
Oh,
Anyway,
yes.
they take fish bladder to put it in, crush it up, and put it in wine to clarify that.
That's to keep the pure or something.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
yeah.
That's,
It just makes it cleaner and last longer.
Is that an organic wine? Are they registered?
I don't think organic wine would have it, but most commercial wines have fish bladder in them.
Jeez, I had one on a plane.
So they're not vegan.
Yeah.
I told a vegan that once. She was so mad at me because she liked her wine. She did not want to hear it.
Some of them will have a vegan. They'd have to be
Yes.
organic. There's one from Spain. I know that it says vegan on it.
Yeah.
I think even the Novus one's from, I believe they are from
Yeah.
Argentine wines.
But most of the commercial wines are not.
Well, it's funny. I used to drink wine once in a while when we were on tour, and every time I'd have a Canadian sip of wine, I would feel awful.
Yeah.
You know, half a glass of Canadian wine, and it was a sulfite thing. There are different regulations on sulfites, believe
Yeah.
it, I think, as well. But
Yeah, every country has their standards.
it's true, yeah. And then I could go into Europe and have no issues. I always thought that was interesting, you know.
Well, and with most craft beer, there's no additives or preservatives in it.
Right.
Because you try to keep it fresh. But a craft beer, you'll notice it will change. Like week 1 is going to be very different than week 12. Like that is a living creature. It's going to change. A lot of your commercial beers, they filter that. They put preservatives in it. So that Budweiser or whatever it is, it's going to be the same for many months because it's not changing anymore.
Yeah.
It's dead. It's got chemicals and stabilizers and all that stuff in there.
Wow.
People won't say, well, I was here a month ago and this tastes different. Like, yeah, because that's nature. It's doing its thing. It's like when new potatoes are different than old potatoes. That's how it works.
I just think of that Blue Jays game I went to. We flew to Toronto and watched the game and saw my daughter, and I just saw the amount of Budweiser that was being consumed. And I thought to myself, that is interesting, how big the commercial beers are at a sporting event.
Oh, they'll pay hundreds of thousands of
It was
dollars for the rights just to have that exclusive.
It's like, and it's huge amounts. Things like 7-Eleven big gulps, that's
And they're very
that's the beer.
expensive.
That's what people are drinking, and they're $21 or something like that, right?
Yeah, but
Wow.
that's how it is with everything. We want
Yeah.
convenience, and there's a price to pay for that kind of stuff.
Right. All my
Price to pay for our sanity, our physical, mental health, all that kind of stuff. Killed by convenience.
It's
killed by our comfort.
Yeah, the learning curve is so real. I mean,
Yeah.
as a grower and consumer and parent in this world right now,
Yeah.
it's evolving every day, and you learn something every day, and you just hope that you can be successful at what you're doing, so that other people can benefit from
Yeah.
it too. Right?
Well, we're relearning so much.
Yes.
We're relearning so
And
much.
trying to find those elements of the past that
Yeah.
made people successful,
Yeah.
that don't rely on commercialization, right? There's very little of it out there. It's like people, certain corporations don't want you to know
they
about these
don't.
things at all.
Yeah.
Get rid of it, right?
There's so many toxins, they say, in our food, like microplastics and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So the more processed the food is, the more
Makes sense.
packaging it's been in, the more it's been chopped up and glued back together, you're going to get way more of that bullshit. Setting in a plastic package, absorbing these chemicals, it's really affecting our health. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, but if you take it from a garden and you put it in your pan and you put it on your plate, it's going to be not just the quality of the food, but what that food's been exposed to is going to be so much less as well.
tell me one thing. Do you think in general the public is much more aware
Oh yeah,
of what they're
I
eating?
think they're more aware,
Yeah.
but I think there's a long ways to go.
Oh, I agree
would
with
love
that,
to
yes.
see our government invest in that top end, like the preventative stuff.
And the more detailed labeling and
Yeah, or just grow. Like if we could be. Nova Scotia has this great possibility with the Annapolis Valley and all this farming. We have in this relatively small population.
support the whole province.
We look after our own healthcare. This could be an experiment for humanity, a place like Nova Scotia. And this is kind of what I advocate for a lot. We could tax the bullshit, subsidize our farms, educate people, and do this weird experiment where we could try to see if we could have a healthier population physically, mentally, better economy, all these things. It would be a fantastic experiment to do. I would love to see it. We could be the strongest, happiest, healthiest people in North America.
I'd like to see it across the country.
Well, it has to
A
start
model,
somewhere.
yeah.
It has to, yeah, right. Like a group of people have to take that on first.
Yeah.
Well, I think,
And we have everything possible to do that.
there is a real movement, though, like we talked about earlier, to
Yeah.
this part of the world.
And it's like I said earlier, sometimes a crisis gives you an opportunity. Right now, we have a healthcare crisis.
Yeah, we do.
We don't have enough doctors. Well, what if we had fewer sick people? Maybe someone like Tim Houston. I'm hoping to get him on the show sometime.
That would be great.
But like, what could we do? We could spend much less money up front to prevent all these things, like less cancer, less diabetes, less hypertension, less all these things.
Well, that would have to start with education,
Yeah.
because I know for a
And supply
fact
chain.
that there are a lot of people that don't believe that there are issues with what they're eating, or they're just
Yeah.
they're unaware,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody's telling them any different, so
No
they
one's telling
continue
me.
to consume the
Yeah.
way they have for years now, and
Yeah.
they're ill, and they're in the
Mhm.
emergency rooms, and they're
Yeah.
that's what
Their
we talk
metabolic
about.
health is destroyed. Their
Yeah,
microbiomes, like they're not eating the right things, they're not sleeping enough,
Yeah.
they're not moving enough.
I think,
Yeah.
and more education and understanding of your own, your physiology itself prevents you from making a doctor visit most of the time. It
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah.
You can figure it out. It's not that difficult sometimes. Oh, wait a minute, I don't need to go there. All they're gonna do is give me a prescription, a Band-Aid. I gotta figure out the root of the problem. Why is this happening to
Right.
me? Let me try something different. There we go. I was, like you said.
Well, I had this light bulb moment in my
Yeah,
life. I didn't
yeah.
realize why I was sick.
Right.
I thought I needed, something.
And the doctors wouldn't have been able to diagnose that,
The
probably.
doctors had no idea.
No.
Well, I think 15 years ago when I realized I couldn't eat gluten, I didn't know what it was, but I knew something was messing
But
me
it was
up.
about 15 years ago they started putting that shit in the wheat.
That's
So
right.
you may not, I'm
And-
no doctor
and
or
be-
scientist,
becoming
but you
very
may not have a
hybridized.
gluten problem. You may have a glyphosate problem.
Well, it still starts with a G.
Yeah. But it's a literal poison.
Yeah, it is.
It's a literal poison.
And I remember it being around me. At the time, I was working, I was living in the Okanagan as well, and we had apple orchards surrounded by them, and you'd just see the yellow strips everywhere, right? Glyphosate right next door all the time too.
Yep.
And working, I remember working with it as a young, like 20 in university even. And I remember a prof saying to us, if you can believe this, well, you could literally drink Roundup and all it would do is give you diarrhea. It's
Yeah, 'cause
quite
it
it's
probably
quite
just
safe.
Carpet bombed your microbiome.
Yeah.
Probably.
It's quite safe.
Oh, yeah.
This
Yeah, it's
was-
not going to kill you today.
This is a doctor of what in plant science, and it's like
That's what science was.
1996 or something.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I don't know about this. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not. The proof is there's no science. Give me the science. Let me see the science. And
Robert Kennedy Jr. Is up on a lot of this stuff. He's an environmental lawyer,
Right.
and he's studied a lot of this stuff.
I have seen
some
some,
speeches and stuff on that. Yeah.
yeah. No,
Really
it's
good,
it's
yeah.
it's kicking our butts. It's so prevalent in the system in this growing system now that if you buy a piece of land, you almost need to get it tested,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because you really don't know what you're dealing with. Then in the water, it's the watershed itself.
Yeah.
And here we are
All this
spraying
stuff.
forest. I saw a map showing where they're spraying on the North Mountain up in, wow, what are we doing here?
These chemicals, and it's one of the highest paying jobs in Canada, I believe, is like
Applicated.
chemical engineering. They're just monkeying with stuff all the time. Like nature knows what it's doing, folks. It's been doing it a long, long time.
I remember mosquito fogging. I remember kids riding their bikes behind it because they thought it was cool.
So much money in chemicals.
Some of those kids are dead,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they wouldn't be 45, 50 years
Yeah.
old, and a lot of those kids that used to do that are
Yeah.
no longer here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
why?
that's not a coincidence.
Not a coincidence. I know there's a high school in PEI. They built a high school on a big potato farm, or just next door to a big potato farm, and like the cancer rates in this high school are like 400% the national average.
It's a lot of spray involved, and aerial spraying too,
Yeah.
I believe.
And or in the water table or whatever.
It's
Who knows?
dithane and all
Yeah.
the various other, and there's phosphor, like the zolone, some of the pests. I can't remember if it's organophosphates. I guess they are. They're very persistent too, and they can really, really harm people. But there's a general lack of awareness of how toxic these chemicals are.
Yeah.
If people
yeah.
if we had a course in school that in grade 9, for example, here are all the chemical groups, kids. Let's see which ones do this and what does the science show.
Yeah.
That might change the way we come out of high school and what we
Right.
do.
What does the science show depends on who's funding the science.
Of course, and that's the
Because
problem.
the big companies don't just own the weapons companies and the food companies and the drug companies. They also own the media. And they're not going to support a journalist that draws attention to their bullshit.
Yeah.
So, and then everyone who questions that is a conspiracy theorist. Well, something's killing everyone.
Well, you can either be sick or you can be healthy, and
Yeah.
it's the choice that we have to make. And if you are sick and you have suffered from inflammation, try kicking that food.
Inflammation is huge.
Get rid of that food and see what happens.
Yeah. And inflammation, not just in your body, but in your mind.
Right.
That's probably a huge part of the anxiety and depression and ADHD and all these things.
It is. And I think one of the stressors, and I remember talking to somebody about this a couple of years ago, just after COVID, is the feeling of being overwhelmed with everything that's going on in your life. Overstimulated, overwhelmed, creates that high anxiety, and it starts creating sleep disorders, and it depletes something called your magnesium, your available magnesium in your body too. We talked about magnesium earlier. And there's not a lot of it in the food anymore that we eat.
Right.
So it's almost like a person needs to add some absorbable form by glycerite, whatever it might be.
There's some higher quality magnesium.
Yeah, or dermally applying something just to...
Yeah.
And
And magnesium is the active ingredient in X-Lax. I don't know if people know that. But if you take enough magnesium,
sense.
you will shit yourself.
Right.
So they say if you're magnesium deficient, you just keep taking it until you start to feel things move. Sorry, folks, this little graphic. We're so deficient, sometimes you have to stock it up. And when you start to realize you'll know when you've gone too far, we'll say. But yeah,
it's also correlated to...
But it loosens things, right? I think we're tight.
Yes.
Our inflammation,
Sleeping too,
everything,
Yeah.
And the magnesium does kind of loosen your whole body. That's why it's the number one ingredient in X-Lax. But if you're feeling tension in your muscle, in your body, in your brain, probably magnesium deficient.
Well, mindfulness, right? I mean, that's a big part of who we are, and we've migrated so far away from that. And it's not just food; it's having that ability to understand our purpose, and if that purpose is betrayed or displayed in some other way, and it doesn't fit with our alignment, it can cause extreme amount of stress and anxiety, and we don't even know it.
We don't even know it.
Right? We don't know what's doing it to us.
I would love to see us get back to some old ways, but I'm just afraid of, will it be a crisis that's going to get us back there? Or will it be awareness and education that's going to, we're going to get back there. I believe we're going, the way forward is in little ways going backwards in some ways. Back to the future kind of thing. I think we're relearning some old things and get back to some of our roots. I just hope that we can do it intentionally rather than picking up the pieces of a broken system.
That's where I'm hopeful too. I think it has to happen, but let's hope it happens the right way.
Yeah.
We're not forced all of a sudden to become something, because we won't have the skills to deal with it.
We don't. There'll be a huge loss of life.
We need more time to adjust to the learning curve, and the natural learning curve, I call it.
Yeah.
It should be there. It's an innate response that humans have.
Yeah.
And we've kind of dislocated that, disconnected ourselves from it.
And we're all survivors. If you're alive today, if you listen to this, you come from a long line of survivors.
Right.
Your people, for unbroken chain of generations, did what it took to survive. So it's in us. We're capable to adapt and survive. You said something earlier about maybe we were advanced in the past. You believe that?
I was thinking of that just now with the tunnels underground that they're finding, and these chambers of storage for produce. I mean, this is now Pleistocene era. We're talking 10, 12, 15,000 years ago. They're finding these sites. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you see things like the pyramids and stuff like that we still don't even understand how they built it. Like is some really interesting theories that we were very, very advanced at one time.
We had know-how, but where did that come from, right?
Yeah.
Or how would it be displaced for so long? I guess is the question. How did we lose it?
Yeah.
But maybe we'll be saying that in 150 to 200 years.
Right.
What
But
happened?
think about, I have this saying.
Hopefully not.
I say when rednecks ruled the world. Because they could, right? Okay, bear with me. So right now, say some cataclysmic thing happened.
Are you writing a country song or
no?
No.
Not yet.
But imagine if something happened that broke our supply chains and broke our governments and broke everything. You know, the rocket scientists and the neurosurgeons and all these very intelligent people that don't even mow their own lawn probably wouldn't make it, right? Probably wouldn't make it. The people that would make it are the rednecks that know how to reload bullets, hunt, fish, build things,
steal
fix
your gas
things,
in the middle of the
steal
night.
your gas in the middle of the night, grow shit. They may only know how to grow weed, but they know how to grow something, right? And those, if something did collapse and there was very intelligent, highly sophisticated people, the more you're relying on a big system, the more vulnerable you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it may have been, society may have been restarted 10,000 years ago by some rednecks of the time. And it may happen again. I know I grew up back Weymouth Woods way. They call it back the road, where there's farmers, and so a lot of people didn't finish high school, but they are some of the most capable people. If something needs to be fixed or built or grown, they will figure it a way. And they have a plethora of skills. They can do anything. Yeah, but there's some very, very intelligent, highly paid people that can only do one thing well: trade stocks. But when there's no stocks to be traded, they're useless for anything else. So I think that could be the
I'm
way
going to have
go.
to get you to grow a garden today.
Well, hey, your money's no good here.
What's happening last year?
I'm not going to take your stocks for my last stock of corn. No.
It's the cubicle way of living.
Yeah.
And we're forced to do it in so many ways. And then when it's over,
Yeah.
what have you got?
It's great if the system's there. But what if the system's not there? And is it a happy, healthy way of living?
Well, that's what
living
I'm
in
saying.
a cubicle with fluorescent lights.
What have you done for?
Yeah.
And then it can be all over so fast.
Yeah.
And have you produced? I don't know. I always wake up. We talked about this, and you said you wake up and you've got purpose. It's purpose, but it's also an important. I feel there's an immediacy for me to make sure that I don't lose that variety because I might be the only one growing it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a scarcity element to what I do, I think, and to what we do up there. And I think that there's accountability and importance to make sure that I get something out of this so that it can continually be successively saved.
Yeah.
Preservation, I don't know.
Because you could make a mistake and end a genetic line or something.
Those porcupines might come out there and suddenly take every single one because I didn't protect enough of them, right?
Yeah.
We had this with a rare variety of corn, and something was getting it. I thought it was raccoons. I really don't know what it was. I think in the end it was deer pulling them off from over top because we had everything fenced and we had tried everything against them. We should just built a cage around the whole thing, the whole area. But in the end, we had about 30 cobs left, and they weren't very good cobs. They selected the good ones, of course. Right?
Oh yeah,
they're very good at that.
yeah.
Nature knows. And
The buffet's open.
Exactly. And so we did get a couple that we liked, and we built that variety. That was 6 years ago, and we finally built that variety back up again.
Wow.
Anyway, I can't find that anywhere. Nobody's selling that variety of corn.
Wow.
So we'll release it next year. I want one more year with it. And it's an old variety from 1920, I'd say mid-20s. Excuse me. But there you go, right? And I lost that completely. Maybe it's nowhere around anymore. There are even some sweet pea varieties. I had to get one from England because nobody has it anymore. This is the second year in a row. An old sweet pea. It's like, okay, if you have the Janet Scott sweet peas and you're growing them, please save the seeds.
Yeah.
And they should be a dark pink. If you've got something weird in there, then don't save them maybe. But it's like, can't find them anywhere anymore.
It's so cool.
I think they're all coming from one place, and that place had a bad year.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
So cool what you do. I'm glad you came in. Thank you so much. Did you know what to expect coming in today?
No, I just figured it would be professional, and yet of course
not
it
very
is.
professional.
No, I know, and low key, and this is cool. So much better than doing radio interviews as an artist and at 6 a.m. and on talk shows.
Yeah, and you get 2 minutes. And,
all right.
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing. Food security and all that stuff.
Well, thank you for
so
opening
important.
up the discussion and keeping it going.
This is how things go.
This
right?
has
We've
got
got
to
to have
happen.
more discussions.
There are hundreds of people I think that would be valuable for people to listen to.
Yeah.
I'm certainly going to listen to this.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware.
Oh yeah.
I kind of was, but wasn't. You know what I mean? I understood that you were doing something like this from a guy named Wes Booth.
Okay. Yeah.
But
I know Wes,
So anyway, I think he drinks your beer.
Oh yeah.
He
sure
would.
does, yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
told me that to check into that, and I did once, maybe, but I didn't follow up with it because we get busy.
We do.
And these are the programs that people need to be a part of.
Great thing about podcasts, though, you can put it on while you're driving, or you can put it on your headphones while you're mowing the lawn, or weeding the garden, or cleaning the house. Sundays are a big day
Or
for
filling
listens.
seed orders for
Filling
14
seed
hours
orders,
a day.
whatever.
Yeah.
I listen to probably 6 or 8 hours of podcasts a day, every day.
Yeah.
Driving or working in the brewery or whatever. It's a great
I do
way.
when I'm inside. I never put anything on my ears outside. I like to listen to everything going on.
Yeah.
I want to hear the red-tailed hawk.
Yeah. That's smart. Well, you're probably less anxious than me. I'm always being fed
depends.
information and stuff. Yeah.
It depends.
Yeah.
I get more anxious about inclement weather
Yeah.
because I'm a grower, but I also find the Maritime's tough because all of a sudden something's coming in and there's 80-kilometer winds, and you got to go out and try to tie this down, and that's a tough thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's just here anymore. I think people in the prairies are dealing with things. Look at Ontario. I mean, Toronto was underwater again. Weren't they on the 16th or something? Or like, I mean, you don't see that very often in the middle of summer twice in a row.
And we're not going to just stop it all of a sudden. We have to figure out ways to manage it and work with it and adapt and survive.
Oh, we better, because we won't be producing
Right.
food if we don't find ways.
Yeah.
And I believe the model of sustainability is on the smaller side of things.
I agree.
I mean, we're always going to have large scale commercial agriculture. That's the way it is, because we're feeding a world.
How do we start a movement here in Nova Scotia? What can we do? What kind of people do we need to bring in?
I think we need to get Mr. Houston on the program here.
Yeah.
And I think we need to sit down and have a forum,
Yeah.
a valley forum with growers, producers, with not only politicians, but with financial lenders. And we need to get people that are capable of growing.
Nutritionists,
Yes,
healthcare.
absolutely.
Because this is fix one problem, it could fix a lot of problems.
We need to quadruple our seed growing, and beyond that with people that are growing produce here. We can. The Annapolis Valley itself can grow enough food to feed all of Nova Scotia and beyond. We're doing maybe a tenth of that? Not even. I don't even think it's that. I think it's like 3% or something.
Really, we only go 3% of the food.
3% of the food we eat is grown in Nova Scotia or something like that. It's something really low. I'd like to get that number. I know Linda Best would have that at Farm Works.
Yeah.
And there's somebody. I don't know if Linda's been on the show.
No.
She might be somebody to.
If I was in charge, I would want us to have 110% of the food we consume.
Why not? Surplus.
Export.
Absolutely.
And if things go wrong, we've got what we need.
Yeah, it can be done in many mesoclimates across Canada. This is a very unique climate because you've got Valley Floor, you've got South Mountain, you've got North Mountain, and you've got all the other areas along the coastlines that are frost free till December. There's so many ways to do it here. It's like 5 little mesoclimate or countries in one, right? Nova Scotia.
It's pretty cool. It's an amazing spot.
It is, and
we got fish in the ocean. We've got livestock, chickens. We've got farming. We've food orchards. There's so many great things.
I think
we have
there's
access to.
Part of it is government accountability too.
Yeah.
There needs to be way more done. Like you talked about the healthcare system. There are easier ways to tackle that burden.
Yeah.
And that's having a healthier population,
Yeah.
growing more healthy food, having more markets, having an awareness. It starts with education. If you don't think what you're eating is making you sick, then we can't help you, can we?
Right. No.
You have to be aware. So creating that awareness through education is huge. I think that's what we've got to do.
Yeah.
Where does that start? Maybe it's forums, maybe it's podcasts.
Well, discussions. Everything starts with a conversation. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming in, man.
Oh, man, it's great.
We've done just over 2 hours there.
We could go for
We could.
yeah.
I could talk about this stuff forever, and this is maybe beginning of a longer conversation.
I would think so. I would hope so.
Yeah. I think it's
believe it
very,
has to
very
be.
important. Yeah.
We're on the precipice of making some good changes, I think.
Yeah.
And these are the kinds of places we can do it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
We have no friggin' choice.
We have no choice.
That's-
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, or if you'd like to support us, please visit Refound Brewing Company at 573 Main Street, Kingston, or buy our product wherever it's available, including our Foolishly Optimistic IPA at your local NSS. Thank you.